Civil war, Keir Starmer is accused of culling left-wing candidates. But with Diane Abbott hanging in the balance, has he botched his own purge?
And the BBC's highest-paid star, Gary Lineker, is back, claiming he's tweets about politics so that he can look himself in the mirror at night. But should he put his phone down?
Well, it's all go for the Reform Party today. We are very shortly indeed, expecting Nigel Farage and Richard Tice to set out Reform UK's first major immigration policy for the general election.
And we should say, as of today, it's a level playing field, because at midnight, Parliament was abolished. Well, temporarily at least. There are no members of Parliament legally. There is no Parliament here in the United Kingdom now. And before anyone thinks, goodness me, a state of anarchy. Wonderful. No government. No, we still have a government. We just don't have a parliament. So
well, that's exactly what I was going to say. Have you noticed a difference without the MPs all there?
Yeah, so no one is allowed to call themselves an MP because there is no MP. But even more interesting, anyone who works for Parliament, well, technically they don't work for anything that is legally in existence for the next 5 weeks. So we're in this sort of state of limbo, but we still do have a king and we still do have a prime minister. We still do have our monarch,
yes. So it's all going to be OK.
And a civil service. So the functions of government run, but no new laws.
But back to Reform, because this is their big announcement. Oh, we can now go live to Reform UK's immigration policy announcement.
Now, the British economy, our great economy, it has a deadly, deadly addiction. That's the harsh truth. It's the drug of cheap overseas labour. And this drug, it's being pushed on every street corner by the Labour Party and by the Tories. They believe that this drug, this addiction, is good for the British economy. Let me tell you, today, it's not. And what we need is a cure to this addiction. And the cure is an employer immigration tax. That is the cure to this addiction. Smart immigration, highly qualified, highly skilled, can be a great thing. But there's a price to it. There's a cost to it. And the truth is, at the moment, there's no cost to big business for employing cheap, low-skilled overseas labour. There's no cost for training. There's no cost for infrastructure. There's no cost for housing. There's no cost for health. There's no cost for transport, and the list goes on. So they're getting away without paying for overseas labour. That cost is borne by the British taxpayer. And the truth is that no other main party will tell you is that that is simply unfair. And what's the consequence of that? The consequence of that is that we have lower wages for British workers. British wages are depressed by mass immigration from overseas. And again, I put it to you that that is simply unfair. And it's particularly unfair for young British people, youngsters leaving school, leaving university. That's where it's unfair. Now, if I take you back to the 1980s and the 1990s, yes, I'm old enough to remember, we had real growth, GDP growth, of 2.5% to 3.5% per year. Yes, if it was less than 2%, people would get worried. If it was less than 1%, people thought it was a moral recession. Now the Chancellor gets excited at 0.5%. But here's the real point. We didn't have mass immigration in those 2 decades. And I'll give you the example of the 1990s. Real wage growth for British workers was about 2.8% every year. We're amongst friends. Let's call that 30% over a decade. But in the decade leading up to the Brexit referendum in 2016, there was zero real wage growth. Surprise, surprise, that was the first real decade of significant rising immigration leading to what's happened in the last few years, where the Tories, after Brexit, they betrayed every promise they made to the British people, to ordinary workers, when they said we're going to bring the immigration numbers down and that'll help wage growth, and they did the opposite. They absolutely opened all the doors. So now we've got some 2.5 million people arrived in the UK in just the last 2 years alone, with no price, no premium paid. And so that actually has a cost to the British taxpayer. And it's simply unfair. So what we need to do is we need to incentivize business to say, actually, if you want to employ people from overseas, that's fine, but you've got to pay a price for it. An employer immigration tax, because actually, we want to incentivize you to employ British workers. Now, big business will say, oh, come on, Richard. British workers don't want to work, to which I say, nonsense. Before the era of mass immigration, in the 1980s and the 1990s, British workers were working, and we had real wage growth. So maybe, actually, it's you, big business, getting away without paying a decent working wage. So what happens is that big business makes ever bigger profits because ordinary workers receive lower wages. And here's basic economic theory, literally since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. The basic economic theory, it's A-level economics. If you increase the supply of something, the price of that supply, in this case, wages, labour, the price of that goes down. Whereas if you limit the supply of it, guess what happens? The price goes up. And if businesses say, well, I can't afford the wages, then guess what happens? They invest in capital equipment to create more productivity. But our investment in capital and productivity is falling. It's a disaster. And the reason is, it's too easy to be addicted to that drug on every street corner of cheap overseas labour. So how will an employer immigration tax work? Well, here it is, and it's actually very straightforward. Look, if you want to employ people, non-British passport holders, then we think it's perfectly reasonable that you pay a premium on national insurance. So actually what you should pay is national insurance of 20%, as opposed to 13.8%. It's about a 45% increase. We think that is a perfectly reasonable premium to pay. Now, of course, there should be an exemption for very small businesses, 5 people and under. And of course, there should be an exemption for healthcare and social care. That's the right thing to do. But here's what will happen. This will actually change people's thoughts and behaviour. We believe over one electoral cycle that this employer immigration tax will raise over £20 billion. Varies, of course, depending on how quickly employers adjust their recruitment processes. But £20 billion in one electoral cycle. Now, you might be pretty astonished that Reform UK, known as a party of creating high growth, reducing taxes, making work pay, you might say this is a bit unusual. Let me tell you what it is. It's fair. It's the right thing to do. Because what we need to do is we need to invest in apprenticeships, in young people, in training, in employing young people, in motivating, in developing. All of these things that have disappeared because there was no incentive for business to invest in young British workers. This is the right thing to do. It's the fair thing to do. Now, I know lots of people will say, hang on, Richard, you're going to destroy growth. No, we're not. There are 9.2 million people here in the UK that are economically inactive. There are well over 5 million people that are on out-of-work benefits. So don't tell me there's a shortage of labour. I think for too many people, work doesn't pay. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to overcome this addiction. Now, choice is a good thing. And businesses might say, well, actually, I really want that person over there. I'm happy to pay the price. That's fine. That is smart immigration. It works. You've got the option, you pays your money, you take your choice. But if you want to bring in people from overseas, then there's a price to that. Because this great country of ours, this incredible nation, we've all paid for it over decades and decades. So it's not unreasonable to expect you to chip in a bit. Now I know, the lefties, I mean, they'll whinge, they'll whine, they'll bleat. There's a surprise. They'll call me all sorts of names and that it's discriminatory. Frankly, my response to them is grow up. I think the vast majority of ordinary are sick of this pathetic identity politics that is designed purely to smear and suppress debate and discussion. I know some people want to talk about immigration, but what we want to talk about in Reform UK, and what I want to talk about, is how we get this country growing again, and how we help young British workers have motivation, get on the housing ladder. It's not fair, as I've said before, that because of mass immigration, housing rents, particularly for young people, have increased just in the last 2 years alone by over 20%. We think this is the right thing to do, but of course Labour and the Tories, they're literally two sides of the same socialist coin. Why are they addicted to this drug? Is it because actually they want to cozy up to big businesses? You've got droves of MPs from both parties leaving Parliament. What are they going to do? Oh, funny that. They're all looking for cozy non-exec directorships on these boards of these big companies. That's the conflict of interest that they've got. They're the globalists. They are for the big multinational corporations. They're not for the British worker. And so it's Reform UK that actually is on the side of British workers. Interestingly, trade unionists agree with me. But of course, the unions themselves, well, they have to do the bidding of Starmageddon and the Labour Party. That's the truth. This is the right thing to do. It's the fair thing to do. The truth is, folks, it's only Reform UK that has a serious plan to reform the United Kingdom, to reform our economy, and this is a key part of it. It's time for an employer immigration tax. It's time for change. And this election on July the 4th, it's time for reform. It's also time to welcome my good friend, who I've worked with, campaigned with for many, many years. And we're looking forward to campaigning again throughout this election period. It's exciting. Sometimes, you know, we never know quite what's going to happen next. But that's part of the excitement. I love campaigning. Knocking on doors, all of that, when people welcome you. And let me tell you what is out there. My good friend knows it, and I know it. Do you remember the old shy Brexiteers? There's a whole load of shy reformers. They're out there. Every day I meet them. That little sort of thumbs up, wink, don't tell anyone. That's why we're going to do so much better than everybody predicts on July the 4th. And that's why with my good friend Nigel, we are going to surprise everybody, because this great country of ours needs reform. So I'm going to hope that the doors will open and my good friend Nigel will emerge. Here he is.
Thank you, Richard. Good. Excellent. Very good. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Good morning, everybody. And Richard, well done. That is a bold, innovative policy. I can hear the multinationals wailing already, because you're quite right. We have become addicted to cheap foreign labour. We're 1 week into the campaign. Gosh, it's going well, isn't it? I mean, who's leading in the polls at the moment? Well, winning by a country mile is none of the above. And it's not particularly surprising. because nothing slippery Sunak says is believable. And as for Starmer, I try and listen to his speeches. I try and focus on what he's saying, and I simply zone out after a few minutes. In fact, the campaign is so dull that the Daily Mail today's big front page is about the disappearance of Lord Lucan, who went 50 years ago, and I think that pretty much says where we are with all of this. But it isn't just the personalities that are dull, it's the lack of real substance on debate. On economics, I literally can't tell them apart, and we'll be talking more about the economy, Richard and I, next week. But the really big elephant in the room, of course, is the subject of legal immigration. Now, of course, there's been huge focus on what's happened in the English Channel over the course of the last 4 years, and rightly so. And we talked about that in Dover the other day. But the subject that the two big leaders do not wish to discuss at all is legal immigration. You see, nobody in this country was ever offered the opportunity to vote for mass immigration. In no election manifesto were people promised that many millions more would come. And just to give it a bit of historical context, if we go right back to Windrush, and we go all the way through the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s, until Blair came to power, net migration into Britain through that whole period of time averaged 30 to 40,000 people a year. Some years it was a little bit higher, some years it was virtually zero. And we could have said 25 years ago that of all the countries in Europe, we without doubt had the best levels of integration of immigrants into Britain, certainly compared to France, Germany, and many other countries. But something changed with Labour, whether it was just willfully wishing to rub the noses of the right in diversity, I don't know. But the doors began to open. And indeed, it was the Blair government and those decisions to open the doors that directly led to the Brexit referendum result. Up until then, talking about leaving the European Union was considered to be a fairly minor constitutional issue, but how does it affect me, Governor? Suddenly, everything changed. So that uncontrolled mass immigration period meant that from 97 to 2010, we had a net inflow of about 2.7 million people. I mean, an absolutely astonishing number. But it was all going to be OK, because we were promised in the 2010 manifesto. We were promised in the 2015 manifesto. We were promised in every single manifesto, including up to 2019. To begin with, they told us net migration would be tens of thousands a year. And in 2019, they talked about raising the barriers, raising the levels at which people could come to make sure we would not be reliant on cheap, unskilled labour. Well, since the Conservatives have been in power, net migration is running at about 4.3 million. So Labour opened the doors, and the Conservatives simply accelerated that trend. And they somehow think they can get away with it because the electorate haven't noticed. Well, they have. And I really do believe that this should be the immigration election. You see, if you ask voters what are their priorities, well, the subject of immigration on its own has gone from about fifth 3 or 4 months ago to second or third, depending which pollster you look at. So what are the big priorities of the electorate? Well, cost of living clearly is one of them. What greater cost of living is there for the average family, for an ordinary folk in this country, than the cost of either renting a property or the cost of buying a property? It is the biggest capital outlay that people face. Now, I was doing my best in 2015, in the general election, to draw an argument that said a massively increasing population meant we had housing shortages, and nobody to listen. But things have changed. Economic report out just 10 days ago, saying that the cost of rents was up by nearly 30% directly as a result of the population explosion. And think about housing itself. Need to build one new property every 2 minutes just to accommodate current levels of net migration. Think about that. One new property we have to build every 2 minutes just to cope with current levels of net migration. We're told more broadly people are concerned about the economy. And of course, GDP. We bow down to the god of GDP. GDP is going up, therefore immigration, mass immigration, is good for the economy. No. If you have more people in the country, it'd be surprising if GDP didn't go up. But what really matters is GDP per capita, and that is falling. What that actually means is that the average family, in relative terms, are getting poorer, and that mass immigration is one of the direct reasons and direct causes of that problem. But it's good for business, we're told. It's good for business. Well, if that's the case, why have our productivity levels sunk to a level that is almost unimaginable? And I say that because our productivity is now below that of France. And given what I know of the French work ethic, I find that very, very difficult to believe. So it doesn't work at any level. Ah, but the NHS, we're told. The NHS, that matters to people enormously. Well, of course it does, as we pump in ever more money and get worse and worse returns. But even there, a population of increase of 10 million people ever since Tony Blair came to power has put intolerable burdens on the NHS. And I genuinely believe that out there in the country, people are beginning to join the dots. They're beginning to understand the population explosion that we're going through is actually leading to a decline in the living standards of pretty much everyone that lives in this country. We are not, as a party, and no party I've ever been part of, anti-immigration. We understand that high-skilled migration into Britain can lead to economic benefits, but we are totally opposed to what has happened over the course of the last 25 years. We are confident that a clear majority of the British public feel exactly the same way as we do on this issue. We are certain that they have never, ever been asked properly at an election whether this is what they want. And who knows, if people start to understand what Reform UK is all about, and let's face it, we're a very new party. We don't have a big brand identity yet out there with the British public. But if over the course of the next few weeks, people start to hear about us, start to see what we stand for, start to actually, we want to stand up for all, not, as in this case, the giant multinationals, then we might just surprise everybody over the course of the next 5 weeks. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Nigel. So we're going to take some questions. We'll start with the broadcasters. GB News, I think, are here. Mark White, do you want to kick off the Q&A? Hopefully you've got a microphone there.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon.
Hi.
Is it on?
Try it. Give it a tap.
1, 2, 3. Hi.
Very good.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us along. With regard to this policy to try to tax employers coming across, how can you ensure that what you're not doing is taxing small businesses who desperately need a certain skilled labour from overseas, and also the health and social care sector, who rely very significantly at the moment on overseas workers?
Yeah, no, great question, Mark. Thank you. Try again. Look, on health and social care, we've already said that there would be an exemption for that. Even the dog enjoys it. So there'd be an exemption for health and social care. And look, at the end of the day, businesses have got to make a choice. This is to create an incentive for all businesses above 5 workers to actually say, well, yes, if you can only find someone from overseas, understand that, that's a choice, but there's a cost to it. There's a price to it for the infrastructure for all of us, because all of us, over decades, we've all paid for it. So, and it's right, because in the 1980s and the 1990s, before mass immigration, we had much higher growth in GDP and also in real wage growth. that's not a coincidence. That's because actually, if there was a labour shortage, people invested in capital equipment. And so you had higher wage growth, higher productivity. And that's what's been missing. It's directly linked, but no one wants to talk about it. No one wants to admit it, except Reform UK. And that's why it's absolutely essential. So look, smart immigration, it's a great thing. The key to good immigration, smart immigration, is both integration and paying a fair price. And that's what we're saying. Who's next? Have we got our broadcast friends at Sky, perhaps?
Hi, thanks for having us along. Nigel, yesterday you gave an interview in which you said that you would be open to having a conversation with the Tory party. You said, what are they going to do back for me? So what would you like the Conservatives to do for you? Are you open to having some sort of deal with them? Would you join the Conservative Party? And Richard, what do you make of all of this?
This was a deeply sarcastic answer given to Harry Cole, the political editor of The Sun, on his new programme, Never Mind the Ballots, just to give you some context of where it was. And it's the old thing. I've been asked this for 25 years. For 25 years I've been asked, what are you going to do for the Conservatives? Why don't you stand aside? He's a frightfully good chap, you know. He was an Eton, really, he was. And actually, I think in 2019, we did the Conservatives the biggest favour anyone's ever done them. With the complete catastrophe of the May Premiership, we formed the Brexit Party, and within 6 weeks, we reduced the Conservatives to their most humiliating election result in nearly 200 years. And that led directly to Theresa May going. That was the first bit of very significant help that we gave the Conservatives in 2019. The second was perhaps more significant, and that was we withdrew 319 candidates because we frankly couldn't bear the thought of a Corbyn, Lib Dem, SNP coalition, a second referendum, an unpatriotic Prime Minister. We couldn't bear the thought of it. So in the interest of the country, we stood aside. That helped enormously, because it gave the nod, didn't it? It's OK to vote for Boris. It's OK to vote for the Conservatives in this election. But what has happened since then? And I touched on it earlier. The reason we got the Brexit result was that mass immigration was, hey, wait, hang on a second, this doesn't make sense. Right? That's why we got the result. That's why the turnout in the referendum was as high as it was. And be in no doubt, millions of those voters that voted for Boris Johnson had previously voted for UKIP and the Brexit Party. We were like a gateway drug through from Labour. And one of their primary concerns was over levels of immigration. They feel betrayed by the Conservative Party. I feel betrayed by the Conservative Party. I have absolutely no interest of any kind at all in doing anything with them. As I say, my reply was deeply sarcastic. You know, what are they ever going to give me? Well, the answer is 3/5 of 5/8 of very little. There is no deal with the Conservatives whatsoever.
And as I said on Radio 4 this morning,
there we go. That was Nigel Farage responding to a question just there over a potential deal with the Conservatives. He suggested, talking to the Sun newspaper last night, that he could be on for a deal. He now claims that what he said to the Sun's political editor, Harry Cole, was sarcastic.
Yes, he said absolutely no chance there, didn't he? Absolutely no chance of a deal with the Conservatives, so no chance of uniting the right in politics.
It must be said, he's only backtracking from that now after last night. Rishi Sunak's spokesperson put out a statement saying, we're not going to do a deal with Nigel Farage. Would this answer have been the same had the Prime Minister not rebuffed what was interpreted as a deal offer last night?
Well, and also Richard Tice and Isabel Oakeshott made their views known on that. Absolutely not. But the big policy announcement that Richard Tice, the leader, made there was for what they call an employer immigration tax. So essentially, if you are a business and you want to hire from abroad, you will have to pay more in national insurance, 20% rather than 13.5%. Now, this is interesting because I thought the Reform Party was for net zero immigration. So why, firstly, have exemptions for health and social care visas and for some small businesses too? Why not just cap visas?
Yes, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's very hard to understand how we would achieve net zero immigration, given we don't count people out. If you're going to have a one-in, one-out policy, how do you do that on the basis of the year? There'll be some times where people leave and not know if they're going to come back in. If someone moves to America for a job and then wants to return, are they going to be barred from returning home? I mean, that's technically immigration.
So maybe this is more about filling the Treasury's coffers, because they say they'll make 20 billion, was it, out of this, depending on how businesses react to this tax increase. But yes, I thought that they would have a more a stronger pitch on immigration, on legal immigration. I thought perhaps it would be just, you know, an absolute cap on visas. But there you go. This is more of an interesting policy suggestion, I suppose.
And, of course, our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, will be sitting down with Nigel Farage and Richard Tice in just a bit. So not just that one question that he got there, but we're going to have a proper interview to examine and interpret what exactly this policy is and get the details for you that we know you need.
Yes, and keep your views coming in. Lots of you getting in touch on this. Lots of people with varying views. Alexander, reform is the only choice for me. Other people saying, actually, this might put up wages and put up the price of goods as a result. So there you go. Keep your views coming in. Now, let's get back on the campaign trail, up and down the country.
Yes, Sir Keir Starmer is in South Wales today, where he's campaigning alongside the country's embattled First Minister, Vaughan Gething.
Yes, the Labour leader has publicly backed Mr Gething after it was announced he would be facing a motion of no confidence next week.
Elsewhere, the Prime Minister is hitting the campaign trail in Buckinghamshire as he looks to shore up support in the Blue Wall amidst strong challenges from the Liberal Democrats.
Yes, well, let's speak to our political editor, Christopher Hope, who is in Buckinghamshire, and also our correspondent, Catherine Forster, who is in Wales. Christopher, just a quick word from you on this immigration policy announcement from the Reform Party.
Yes, hi Tom, hi Emily. Yeah, it's different, isn't it, to that net immigration policy which you talked about there, which had been the plan set out a few weeks ago from Reform. But I think it's got something for it. The idea of British jobs for British workers has been mooted since Gordon Brown was in power. We do know that lots of companies have brought in lots of cheap labour, which has meant we have got a lot of people who aren't working in this country on benefits. If you can give a tax cut for companies that do employ people who are British, it might actually work. It's quite a radical policy, which I think will be startling, I think, for the Tory party. And later on, we're trying to find out what the PM thinks about it.
Although it's interesting that they did have this net zero policy. Now they've just got this 20% national insurance contribution for employers who employ migrants. It seems like they're backsliding. Could there be the accusation here that if they've already watered down their proposals once, they might water it down further closer to power?
Yes, I'm sure we'll hear from Mark White when he asked them later on. We heard, didn't we, from Nigel Farage saying this is the immigration election. It's the issue, Richard Tice said, isn't talked about by politicians. It hasn't really raised its head either in the election campaign, and that might help. But certainly, you know, I think Reform UK is a young party. The net migration policy they had before was one when they thought there'd be an election in November. I think as we get nearer to an election, and it's just 5 weeks away now, they're trying to find actual policies that might actually work. And here's an idea, but you are right to say it is backsliding. There's opt-outs there for companies with fewer than 5 employees and those in the health sector where they need to have more people coming in because of lack of skills in this country. But it is a radical step. I think it might work on the doorstep, but they do need something, because we do need to hear more from Reform. I think that with Nigel Farage not standing, the party is on the back foot. You heard their clarification to that question from Nigel Farage. They do not want to deal with the Tories. The idea of that was a joke, apparently, to the Sun newspaper yesterday by Nigel Farage. But the papers today are full of suggestions of a deal, and that's why I think they've got to get that back in its box as soon as they can.
Yes, and you are, of course, on board the Prime Minister's battle bus, the Conservatives. Are they looking to capitalise on the drama at the top of the Labour Party at the moment?
I'm sure they will do when they do give us their comments on Diane Abbott. Again, that's not really clear whether she'll stand as an independent or for the Labour Party. The deadline is tomorrow, so we'll hear shortly. I mean, there's a real, I think the way they've handled this issue with Diane Abbott does look chaotic. It isn't really respecting her legacy in the party. She has done her time for those dreadful comments in The Observer. She has been had some education about how to consider racism for Jewish people as well as black people. So yeah, they will try and make more of that. Their big issue there on the way to Buckinghamshire, where we'll see Rishi Sunak later, is VAT. There's a first poster unveiled by the Tory party. It says, if you think Labour will win, start saving. They're trying to tie the Labour down not to increase VAT. We've heard from Jeremy Hunt already on GBNews and elsewhere saying they will not increase that if the Tories win. So what will Labour do on these other areas? How will they spend the money they want to spend without raising taxes? Because the Tories are clear they want to cut back on the benefits bill and other places, but it looks like the Labour so far has not committed to spending cuts, and that's a challenge for them. But the Tories are on the front foot here, going to Buckinghamshire, trying to see if they can make those points.
Well, let's cross now to Catherine Forster. Thank you, Chris. Let's cross to Catherine Forster, who's with the Labour Party in Wales, because this big issue, most independent economists say that there will need to be tax raises under a future Labour government if they're going to meet all of their spending commitments. But every time that the Tories say, you're going to raise this tax, they say, no, we won't. Then we're going to raise that tax. They say, no, we won't. They're being penned in and penned in. It becomes harder and harder to see what's actually going to happen under Labour.
Yes, and the reality is that there's not much money around. Whoever is in power after the next election will have extremely difficult decisions to make, whether that be rising taxes or cuts to public services. Neither party want to talk about that because, of course, it is not the way to get elected. But Sir Keir Starmer has been talking here this morning about his 6 steps to change Wales. They are, I have to say, exactly the same as the 6 steps he's announced elsewhere. Labour are talking in very broad brushstrokes, aren't they? They're not really coming out with anything new because they don't want to rock the boat. They're miles ahead in the polls and they don't want anything that's going to jeopardise that. A couple of comments on Diana Abbott. Talking to journalists afterwards, he was much kinder in his language towards her, still saying no decision has been taken, saying she's a trailblazer, she's overcome incredible challenges and horrendous abuse, really paying tribute to her. So let's see what happens with that. But also quite awkward because here, of course, the fairly new Welsh First Minister, Vaughan Gething, is facing a vote of no confidence next week, and it all hinges on £200,000 of donations which he accepted from a man convicted twice of environmental offences. Now, that meant that in his campaigning, he had nearly 4 times as much money to spend as the person he was up against. So you can see how helpful that is. Now, a lot of people think that this stinks, frankly, and I asked Sir Keir Starmer of his view on it. Let's have a look.
I think it's absolutely clear that no rules were broken, and Vaughan Gething has answered all the questions that are put to him. The argument that I'm putting forward this morning is what a game changer it would be if we were able to elect in a Westminster Labour government that would work with the Welsh Labour government, delivering for people across Wales. Because up until now, there's been conflict. So I've been working with Vaughan as leader of the opposition. I want to be able to work with him as Prime Minister, because that will absolutely sort of turbo boost the work that we can do delivering for Wales.
Yes, so it will be interesting to see what happens with this vote of no confidence next week. It's likely he will survive it, of course, because of the numbers in the Senate. Although, of course, there are people, Labour members of the Senate, who are not happy with how he came to power. And if one or more of them were to abstain, it could quite possibly be serious. We'll see next week. But yeah, a few blips in row has really been very, very messy indeed, and we still don't know how it's going to end.
Yes, well, thank you very much indeed. Catherine Forster there in Wales, and Christopher Hope, thank you for your time too on board the Conservative battle bus.
Now, it's fascinating getting round the country, as all of these politicians seem to be doing. Also notable, we'll be talking to her a little bit later, Olivia Utley has been with Ed Davey, who seems to be having perhaps the most fun campaign of any of the party leaders so far. Not only has he ridden a bike in Wales, not only has he fallen in several times trying to wobble around on a paddleboard, today he has been gallivanting down a slip and slide. There he is on a bicycle for those watching on television. There's his paddleboard, and whoa, there's his slightly convected fall, and here is the marvellous, slightly grey and drizzly slip and slide that he's been in today. One wonders if he's actually done any campaigning at all.
Well, this is his form of campaigning, isn't it? He gets into the public eye. You know, some people might like the sort of dad joke type thing.
Well, I think it's fairly clear that whenever the Lib Dems come up with a policy, no one's particularly interested. But shall we talk to Olivia Utley, who joins us from the campaign trail in Somerset? And Olivia, you were there at that slip and slide with Ed Davey. What was it like?
I was indeed. Well, Ed Davey seems to be having a whale of a time. He was in Windermere paddleboarding just 2 days ago, cycling yesterday, and now he's over here in Somerset going down a slip and slide. There are questions we've asked him and other people have asked him if, now that he seems to be taking himself not very seriously at all, why should voters take him seriously? His answer is that he takes voters' concerns very seriously indeed, but basically, he's not quite saying this, but the truth is the Lib Dems need to do these kind of stunts to get into the headlines. No one otherwise is that interested in what they're up to. What's really tricky for Ed Davey at the moment is trying to straddle the line between talking about the differences between himself and Labour, because obviously the Lib Dems have to prove to voters that there's a point in voting for the Lib Dems rather than Labour, but also he wants to keep his powder pretty dry, because realistically, the best case scenario for the Liberal Democrats is that the polls narrow to the extent that there's a hung parliament, and in that situation then you could end up with the Lib Dems becoming kingmakers. I've asked Ed Davey on every day of this tour whether Keir Starmer would make a good Prime Minister. He will not answer that question. He is perfectly happy to say that Rishi Sunak does not make a good Prime Minister, but he doesn't want to criticise Keir Starmer. In terms of policies, the Liberal Democrats are doing pretty broad brushstroke things. They're talking, you know, sort of inoffensive policies, removing sewage from the rivers, which is very, very popular indeed, of course, solving the dentist drought, and today talking about putting a mental health practitioner in every single primary and secondary school. They say that all of this is fully costed responsibly on their manifesto. We will have to wait and see, because at the moment they seem to have pledged not to raise VAT, not to raise national insurance, not to raise income tax. So how exactly are they going to pay for it all? It seems, talking to Lib Dems on the ground here, as though basically their calculation is that they know they're not going to win this general election. There's no talk about them winning this general election. It's not like 2019 when Joe Swinson, the then leader, was going to be the next Prime Minister. It's about picking up individual seats from Conservatives around the country. So in a way for the Lib Dems, it is more about reminding people that they exist and that there's a purpose in voting for them, rather than coming up with the sort of fully costed policies that the two main parties are having to do during this election campaign.
Yes, Olivia, I mean, we've been catching up with you every day on board this Liberal Democrat battle bus, and I must say, you do get to go to some of the most beautiful areas of the country, beautiful leafy market towns,
posh places,
Lake District, and so on. These are their targets. This is where their voters are.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's a huge bonus for me of this trip that pretty much every Liberal Democrat seat is some sort of beautiful area with, lovely little towns we've been going to. These are the Lib Dem target seats. The southwest is where they really, really want to win big time. Before 2015, the end of that coalition, the Cameron-Clegg coalition, the Liberal Democrats held almost all of the southwest of England, from Somerset to Devon and Cornwall. In 2015, those seats fell like dominoes. There are a couple of yellow bricks, but it is essentially a blue wall. We were in Bath yesterday. That is one of the few Lib Dem seats. The Lib Dems
and
this
Olivia,
time round are
sorry
really
to
hoping
interrupt,
to win
but
over huge swathes of the southwest.
You're standing in front of a bus that says Yellow Hammer. Of course, the southwest, famously very Eurosceptic part of the country, apart from places like Bath, they're going to have to toe a gentle line on the Europe issue if they want to win back rural Somerset, rural Devon, rural Cornwall.
I think that's a really good question, Tom, because some of the seats which they're trying to win down in Somerset are really quite conservative. In fact, Somerton, where I was yesterday, because of the boundary changes, now takes in some of Jacob Rees-Mogg's seat. Ed Davey does seem to be treading a pretty careful line. I asked him today whether the price of a Liberal-Labour coalition would be a second referendum, and he wouldn't answer that question. He is talking much, much less about Brexit. He doesn't seem to be the big Remainer that he was just a few years ago.
Yes, it's all gone a bit quiet on that front. Thank you very much indeed, Olivia Rutley there, our political correspondent in lovely Somerset.
Now, we're asking, is the Labour Party at war with itself? That's up next.
Hi there and welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. A lot of cloud today with some heavy showers around, but also some brighter spells, particularly towards the north and northwest. Higher pressure is building in, but it's taking its time. Low pressure still with us. That's carrying a couple of weather fronts into eastern parts of the UK. So some longer spells of rain there from Teesside down towards Norfolk. A lot of cloud as well, and a cool breeze from the North Sea. Otherwise, it's a mix of bright spells and showers. The heaviest downpours with some thunder and hail likely from the Midlands down towards the southeast. Where we do get some brighter spells, though, it's going to feel a bit more pleasant and a drier day for the north and northwest compared with Wednesday. However, the focus for the heavy downpours will be across the south and southeast, particularly through central southern England into southeast and East Anglia, and also through the Midlands. But for Wales, for northern England, for Scotland and Northern Ireland, well, there will be some sunny spells in between the showers. And although a cool breeze is blowing from the north-northwest, it's going to feel pleasant where we do get some of those sunny spells coming through. Now into the evening, we're going to see increasingly those showers disappear. Clear spells breaking out widely, particularly towards the west, although there will be some cloud remaining in the east and some outbreaks of rain running down the North Sea coast. Where we got the cloud, temperatures staying in the double figures. Where we've got the clear spells, especially for Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, temperatures dipping into the mid-single figures. So we start off Friday with a lot of cloud in the east and central part of England, some outbreaks of rain turning to showers by the afternoon. Again, some heavy downpours for East Anglia and the southeast, but a much drier day elsewhere and plenty of sunshine for Scotland, Northern Ireland, West Wales and the southwest, where we've got the sunshine feeling very pleasant indeed with temperatures into the high teens or low 20s.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do. His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, and unlike you. That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frosty in here, isn't it?
You'll have one of me one day.
Yeah, for dartball practice. Britain's newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is coming up to 10 minutes to 1. Now, is the Labour Party at war with itself? The Member of Parliament for Brighton Kempton, Lloyd Russell Moyle, he's been told he won't be eligible to stand in the upcoming general election after an anonymous complaint about his behaviour, something he was told was something that happened 8 years ago, but he believes is politically motivated.
And following his suspension, Lloyd Russell Moyle described the allegations as false, but he did say he would cooperate with the investigation and expects to be fully exonerated. But this has opened up claims that Keir Starmer is culling the left. With Diane Abbott and also Faiza Shaheen, who was going to be the candidate for Chingford against Ian Duncan Smith.
Let's talk to the political correspondent at The Spectator, James Heal, about this. Because, James, it does seem that there has been a purge overnight, 5 minutes to midnight, just before dissolution of Parliament. But perhaps what's concerning here for people is that it's not just about getting rid of people that Starmer might not like. It's the way in which it's done, including these allegations, including sexual assault.
Yes, I mean, there's always been a fair amount of cynicism when it comes to Labour selections. There's a whole book to be written on the sort of machinations of various apparatchiks involved in all of this. I would say that Keir Starmer and his team and his supporters have certainly been particularly ruthless when it comes to candidate selections from 2020 onwards and asserting control over that. You could probably count the number of left-wingers on one hand who've been selected, people like Lorraine Beaver, people like Annalise Midgley, but on the whole it's been pretty much overwhelmingly 150 or so stormtroopers, Keir leaders, in other words, who support the current leader. The most interesting thing of this now, Tom, is those MPs who are already in Parliament, members of the Socialist Campaign Group, staunch supporters of Jeremy Corbyn, people like Diane Abbott and Lloyd Russell Moyle, and then, of course, perhaps the leading Corbynite to have been selected prior to Keir Starmer properly asserting himself over the whole Labour machine, which was Faiza Shaheen, who, if she got elected, I think, Tom, would have been a real leader on the Labour left. So a lot of people are saying that it's a purge. I will say that Keir Starmer and Darren Jones both claim it's not, which seems to be the first purge in history which is in denial about the causes and consequences of this.
Well, Keir Starmer, his goal is to get into power. Will this purge, as it were, will it actually play quite well with the broader electorate?
I think that's the calculation, particularly about where Labour needs to win seats, which is that, you know, they see the Corbyn era as being an anathema to many voters in swing seats, particularly in the southeast of England, particularly in some of those red wall areas. So perhaps there's no harm to be done from a Labour point of view from their perspective, which is by having them being as ruthless and sort of casting off the remaining Corbynites, as it were. Longer term, it might solve up issues in terms of parliamentary Labour Party management within Parliament. And of course, the danger is, Emily, is that you then get a spectacle where a week into a campaign, we're back to the Labour Party's favourite parlour game, talking about itself and its own navel-gazing activities.
And isn't this the issue here? That it seems that the Labour Party is much more concerned about battling itself and fighting itself than about talking about what's going to happen in the country. It reminds me, actually, the Lloyd Russell Moyle case, of a case in 2019 where in Ilford there was going to be a selection. It looked like a guy on the right of the party, someone called Jazz, was going to win this. And then 5 minutes to midnight, some sort of complaint about his behaviour came about. Of course, it was all dismissed about 5 months later after the disciplinary process, but it meant he couldn't stand in the seat, and the left-winger Sam Tarry got in. So it seems like, to some extent, this happened in the previous administration as well within the Labour Party, weaponising assault claims.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that a cynic might suggest perhaps that the Keir Starmer supporters and allies are much better at this game than Jeremy Corbyn's was. Every time I think that there was a selection issue, the leadership under Jeremy Corbyn always let the local parties decide, whereas in this case I think there's been a much stronger central grasp here. The difficulty is, of course, Tom, is that Keir Starmer was elected in April 2020 as Labour leader on a pledge for local parties to choose their candidates. That's obviously, I think, been somewhat ridden roughshod over, so I think that there's a difficulty there. And of course, when Keir Starmer's asked about these broken promises, he always likes to say, oh, well, on the economy, the Tories trashed it with the mini-budget. Well, he can't blame it on this. You know, this is an entirely Labour Party issue. He's been in charge for 4 years. He's had the rules. He's made them. And now, of course, he's the one who's being judged by them.
And we should say we don't know if the allegations against Lloyd Russell Moyle, we don't know exactly what they are, and we don't know if they are true or false.
No, we don't, but we do know that they were made the day before Parliament was dissolved, which
Yes.
perhaps tells us something.
Yes, but it doesn't tell you whether they're true or not. Thank you very much, James Heal, political correspondent at The Spectator. Always great to speak to you. We've got a huge amount coming up. Getting your views as well on what Richard Tice and Nigel Farage had to say with their new immigration policy.
And a big debate on Gary Lineker. Should he put his phone away, finally? That after this.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. A lot of cloud today with some heavy showers around, but also some brighter spells, particularly towards the north and northwest. Higher pressure is building in, but it's taking its time. Low pressure still with us. That's carrying a couple of weather fronts into eastern parts of the UK. So some longer spells of rain there from Teesside down towards Norfolk. A lot of cloud as well, and a cool breeze from the North Sea. Otherwise, it's a mix of bright spells and showers. The heaviest downpours with some thunder and hail likely from the Midlands down towards the southeast. Where we do get some brighter spells, though, it's going to feel a bit more pleasant and a drier day for the north and northwest compared with Wednesday. However, the focus for the heavy downpours will be across the south and southeast, particularly through central southern England into southeast and East Anglia, and also through the Midlands. But for Wales, for northern England, for Scotland and Northern Ireland, well, there will be some sunny spells in between the showers. And although a cool breeze is blowing from the north-northwest, it's going to feel pleasant where we do get some of those sunny spells coming through. Now into the evening, we're going to see increasingly those showers disappear, clear spells breaking out widely, particularly towards the west, although there will be some cloud remaining in the east and some outbreaks of rain running down the North Sea coast. Where we got the cloud, temperatures staying in the double figures. Where we've got the clear spells, especially for Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, temperatures dipping into the mid-single figures. So we start off Friday with a lot of cloud in the east and central part of England, some outbreaks of rain turning to showers by the afternoon. Again, some heavy downpours for East Anglia and the southeast, but a much drier day elsewhere and plenty of sunshine for Scotland, Northern Ireland, West Wales and the southwest, where we've got the sunshine feeling very pleasant indeed with temperatures into the high teens or low 20s.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the final week to see how you can win a whopping £20,000 cash. And because it's totally tax-free, every single penny will be in your bank account to do whatever you like with. £20,000 in tax-free cash really could be yours this summer. Hurry, as lines close on Friday. You've got to be in it to win it. For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
How prevalent is it in those with darker skin, like me?
That's a great question, and it's one that we get a lot. So your skin tone does affect your risk of skin cancer. People at the most risk are people with lighter skin tones, so light-coloured hair and eyes as well, lots of moles and freckles, a history of sunburn or a family history of skin cancer. But people with darker skin tones can still burn and can still get skin cancer. anybody can get skin cancer. So I would encourage everybody, regardless of your ethnicity or your skin tone, to think really seriously about taking care when it's sunny. That myth that you've mentioned that black people can't get skin cancer is really prevalent, and that's something I want to dispel right now immediately. Because more black people think maybe they can't get skin cancer, that might mean that when they spot something unusual for them, they're less likely to go to the doctor and they're diagnosed later. And when you're diagnosed later, your outcomes do tend to be worse.
So the figures are disturbing that more people are getting skin cancer. But what about outcomes? I mean, if you do get skin cancer, what are your prospects?
So yeah, like you say, this research is a mixed picture. We're seeing incidence, so the number of new cases going up, which is not good news. But there is some good news in that mortality, so whether you're going to die or not, is actually going down. And we think that's partly due to early diagnosis, which I just mentioned is so important. But also research has led to better and kinder treatments, which mean the outcomes are likely to be better. So now, if you're diagnosed at the earliest stage, stage 1, with melanoma, actually around 9 in 10 people will survive their disease for 5 years or more.
The People's Channel.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Thursday, the 30th of May. I'm Emily Carver.
And I'm Tom Harwood.
Labour civil war. Keir Starmer is accused of culling left-wing candidates, but with Diane Abbott hanging in the balance, has he botched his own purge?
And a shooting in Hackney. 3 people and 1 child have been shot and injured in East London in a drive-by attack outside a restaurant. The child remains in a serious condition in hospital.
And the BBC's highest-paid star, Gary Lineker, of course, is back, claiming he tweets about politics so he can look himself in the mirror at night. But after continually being accused of disregarding the BBC's impartiality rules, has Lineker gone too far? We'll be debating that very shortly. This is a good one from Gary.
Yeah,
what else would you expect? Yes, his Twitter, I suppose, makes him feel worthy. He says he doesn't do it to try and influence. He just does it simply so he can look at himself in the mirror every night.
I've got a theory. I think it's a religious experience for him. In a bit way that that before the 95 Theses were nailed up on the church door by Martin Luther, and he decried the way that the Pope was selling indulgences,
right?
And that people could have absolution from their sins by giving money to priests, and it was all sort of corrupt and all the rest of it. I think perhaps in the same way that the Catholic Church worked at that time.
You're losing me here, yeah.
That people could commit sin and simply give money to a priest and absolve it that way.
Right.
Perhaps Gary Lineker feels guilty about all of his wealth and his fame and his power.
Right, yes.
And he absolves it by tweeting woke things on Twitter.
Yes, I can see that. I think there are quite a few people who do that. And Gary Lineker is the chief virtue signaller. But, you know, the BBC have let him off. So far, he continues to tweet politically, but has he gone too far? He is now openly mocking the BBC's impartiality, is he not?
And I think it does make there's a bigger question, I think, during a general election campaign. He's the highest-paid star of the biggest broadcaster in the country, the broadcaster that everyone pays for if they want to watch any television at all. It's funded by a tax, and I think that is the big problem when it comes to how people behave on social media.
But he is a sports presenter. Does he deserve freedom of speech when it comes to political opinion? Let us know, gbnews.com/your say. It is your headlines with Tatiana.
Emily, thank you and good afternoon. The top stories. The Labour leader insists he's not trying to block left-wingers from standing for Labour after veteran MP Diane Abbott claimed they're facing a cull. Ms Abbott was reinstated as a Labour MP yesterday after a long suspension. Speaking to reporters in Monmouthshire, Sir Keir Starmer said he wants the highest quality candidates. He also described Ms Abbott as a trailblazer. Starmer has today pledged to fight for the future of steel in Wales amid concerns over job losses at the Port Talbot Steelworks. Sir Keir also reaffirmed Labour's 6 pledges, including delivering on economic stability and cutting NHS waiting times.
Every proposal that we put on the table is fully costed and fully funded. And we've been really clear about not raising income tax and NI. And we've said repeatedly that nothing in our plans require us to raise tax. And that's why we've been able to set out our position on VAT as well. And that's in stark contrast to a government that's taken the tax burden on working people to the highest level since the war. And during this campaign is showing it hasn't learnt the lessons, because it is putting unfunded tax commitment on the table on top of unfunded tax commitment.
Meanwhile, Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davey has pledged to improve mental health among young people and children across the country. He's campaigning in Frome today. Sir Ed says his party would treble taxes for social media firms to fund a mental health professional in every primary and secondary school.
Today, the Liberal Democrats have got a really important message on mental health, our children's mental health. And my colleagues Munira Wilson and Daisy Cooper have been out there. I'm talking to you now about our policy is to get a qualified mental health professional in every school, in our primary schools and our secondary schools. And only the Liberal Democrats are arguing for that with a costed programme. It's so important. Our children's mental health has never been in such a crisis. Huge waiting lists for help. And it's not just about their health now, it's how it impacts their whole future.
And Plaid Cymru is launching its general election campaign at an event in Bangor. The party's leader, Thrin ap Iorwerth, spoke earlier, promising to keep the Conservatives out of Wales and keep Labour in check.
In the brilliant catch-in wager in this new seat of Bangor Aberconwy, we see what Plaid Cymru is made of. Champions of our communities, champions of Wales, people who will always fight against injustice whenever we find it.
The King will take part in the Trooping the Colours ceremony next month, though the Princess of Wales will be absent as she continues her recovery from cancer. His Majesty will inspect the soldiers from a carriage rather than the traditional horseback. The celebration sees the royal family gather on the balcony of Buckingham Palace after a display of military pageantry. It'll take place in London on the 15th of June. The Chancellor has accused Labour of having a secret plan to raise VAT, despite Rachel Reeves ruling it out. In a statement last night, the Shadow Chancellor reaffirmed Labour's commitment not to increase income tax, national insurance or VAT. But Jeremy Hunt accused Ms Reeves of failing to make up her mind. Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury Darren Jones told GB News the Chancellor isn't being upfront.
I mean, that's just not true. I mean, I kind of understand why Jeremy Hunt is trying to confect a story where, oh, you know, the Tories have scored a point against the Labour Party in the election campaign, but it's just not correct. I mean, Rachel Reeves, our Shadow Chancellor, has been consistently clear, even before the general election was called, that we think the tax burden under the Conservatives has become too high. It's the highest it has been in 70 years on working people, and we want that to come down. Because we want it to come down, we're not going to be increasing taxes on working people.
In other news, 2 bodies have been found in the search for a father and son who went missing during a hiking trip in the Scottish Highlands. Tom Parry, who's 49, and his 12-year-old son Richie failed to return to their Cheshire home yesterday. Police inquiries are ongoing, but the circumstances are not believed to be suspicious. And finally, a guitar used by John Lennon has become the most expensive Beatles instrument ever sold at auction. The famous 12-string Hootenanny acoustic guitar was found in an attic after it was presumed lost for more than half a century. It sold for £2.3 million to a telephone bidder at the Hard Rock Cafe in New York. Lennon famously performed the song You've Got to Hide Your Love Away on the guitar in the 1965 film Help. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Tom and Emily.
good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past 1. Now, almost 1,000 soldiers and around 240 horses from the Household Division are taking part in this year's King's Birthday Parade. They performed a khaki rehearsal at the event today.
Yes, it's now been confirmed that the Princess of Wales will not be present at the Colonel's Review. There was some expectation that she might make it. I believe that is on the 8th of June. So joining us now is GB News royal correspondent Cameron Walker. Cameron, this is the breaking news, isn't it, that Princess Catherine will not be attending this event?
Yeah, it certainly is, Emily. I've spent the last couple of hours here on the Horse Guards Parade that the Brigade Major's Review. It's the first time that the almost 1,000 soldiers, 200 and many horses have paraded in front of an audience trying to get the horses used to a crowd. But at the same time, Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace have confirmed some good news and some bad news. So first, the good news. They have confirmed that His Majesty the King will be taking part in the King's Birthday Parade, trooping the colour on the 15th of June. But adaptations have been made because he is still undergoing cancer treatment. So instead of riding on horseback, the King is going to be riding in a carriage from Buckingham Palace with Her Majesty the Queen down the Mall here to Horse Guards Parade, and will inspect the troops from a carriage rather than on horseback. And here's the bad news. The Princess of Wales, she is Colonel of the Irish Guards. It is the Irish Guards this year who are trooping their colour in front of the Sovereign. And usually tradition would be that she would take part in the Colonel's Review the week before. That's on the 8th of June. But due to her ongoing cancer recovery, that is not happening. The Princess is not going to be taking part in that review. Instead, General James Bucknell will take part in that on the Princess's behalf. In terms of whether we're going to see the Princess at Trooping the Colour itself on the 15th of June, there still remains a bit of a question mark over that. From the information we got from Kensington Palace today, I think we do need to manage those expectations. And if she turns up, then great. If not, I don't think we should be too disappointed, because the Princess, as Kensington Palace says, needs to be given the time and space to recover. And as she said, that's what she would like to happen too. But it was an incredibly busy parade here. Considering it was the first rehearsal in front of a crowd, it appeared to have been going very well indeed. As I said, nearly 1,000 soldiers were taking part in that from all 7 regiments in the Household Division. Irish Guards trooping their colour, 1,000 members of the crowd here. A few more rehearsals to go before the big event itself, but I was speaking to James Shaw, who's in charge of the parade here, a little bit earlier on, and he said because the King is actually going to be here, considering the year he's had, they want it to be the best parade they have had so far.
Cameron, I think a lot of people will hear this this news about Princess Catherine and be instinctively concerned. I think a lot of people will be thinking, weren't we expecting Princess Catherine to be back around Easter time, and is this not a delay to the scheduled recovery that the country was perhaps expecting?
No, because I think that guidance, Tom, came back in January, where the Princess went into hospital for that abdominal surgery. But clearly since then, she's had a cancer diagnosis. She delivered that quite poignant and quite personal video to the nation, where she explained she wanted to be given the time and space to recover. So I think this is just, this is fitting with the narrative that she is just still recovering and undergoing that preventative chemotherapy. I don't think we need to read into this that this is a significant update from Kensington Palace. It's not. It's just kind of fitting with the narrative that, of course, she has cancer. She's undergoing that cancer treatment, and therefore she is not going to be carrying out public engagement. She's not working at the moment. She's at home recovering. When she is ready and doctors give the green light, I'm sure she'll want to be back on doing public engagements.
Well, I'm sure we all hope to see her as soon as possible. But thank you very much, Cameron Walker, GB News' royal correspondent, bringing us the very latest from the royal family.
Now, is Sir Keir Starmer culling left-wing Labour candidates? That's the accusation of Diane Abbott. She claimed she'd been barred from standing as a Labour candidate in the upcoming general election. But in a curious twist, this is a claim the Labour leader has denied. So is Keir Starmer stumbling over his own cull? He claims that he simply wanted the highest quality candidates to stand.
Well, Sir Keir Starmer made the comments whilst campaigning in Monmouthshire alongside embattled Welsh First Minister Vaughan Gething, who Starmer continues to publicly back after it was announced he would be facing a motion of no confidence next week.
Well, let's speak to our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. She's in Monmouthshire following the Labour leader. And Catherine, this seems like a bit of a mess. I mean, lots of people are saying, well, he's a ruthless guy, he's got rid of some candidates, but with other candidates, it seems like he's stuck and rowing back and doing what we might describe as a candidate hokey-cokey.
Yes, it really is, and perhaps the first sort of misstep of this campaign, because Diane Abbott, of course, was the first female black MP ever elected to Parliament. She served for decades. She's a huge, huge figure, and she was suspended over this opinion piece she wrote. She apologised straight away. She spent a year out of the party. The investigation wrapped up, we're told, months ago. She did a training course, and yet they let her back into the party only a couple of days ago. But at that point, she said that she was going to be banned from standing. Now, she is deeply happy about that, as you would expect. Sir Keir Starmer is saying no, absolutely no decision has been made. It's a matter for the NEC. It'll be made in the coming days. I did detect a change in his tone today. Today, he was very keen to talk about her in fairly glowing terms, pay tribute to her, saying that she was a trailblazer, that she'd overcome incredible challenges, and she'd suffered horrendous abuse over the time that she served as an MP. So I wonder whether they might ultimately decide to let her stand. We don't know. And I mean, think real questions over why this has all taken so long. It does seem like the original plan had been to give her back the whip and then for her to make the decision not to stand and sort of bow out gracefully and with dignity. But of course, because we had the news that she was banned first, it's all gone horribly, horribly wrong. And of course, she's not the only person not sure if they're going to be able to stand. Lloyd Russell Moyle has been told that he actually can't. He was another Corbyn supporter, of course. This is because of some allegations that have emerged dating back some 7 years. And also, Faiza Shaheen, she was thinking she was going to be standing against Sir Ian Duncan-Smith in Chingford. She had a baby by C-section only 6 weeks ago. She's been out and about campaigning already, but now she's also being told, no, you're not standing. She is very upset about that. But what these people have in common, of course, is they were all to the left of the party, big Corbyn supporters. It does feel like a little bit of a purge of the left. But of course, with Diane Abbott, we still don't know what the outcome will be.
Thank you very much indeed. Catherine Forster, our political correspondent there on the Labour campaign trail. Yes, Faiza Shaheen, very much a darling of the left. Very much a darling of the left, but she was very much up for the fight against Ian Duncan-Smith. And she's going to now, apparently, according to reports anyway, she's instructed a lawyer.
Well, let's speak now to Dennis McShane, the former Labour Europe Minister, who joins us in the studio. Dennis, thank you so much for joining us. I mean, to me, I can understand the political game here that the Labour right play. They want to get rid of other candidates. Fine, fair enough. There are two issues for me here. Number one, the way they're doing it, it seems to be completely without due process, sometimes even including sexual assault allegations, which seem like an absolutely disgusting thing to do if we're talking about purging political candidates. I mean, we don't know if these are true or not. It seems very, very odd. But the other thing here is that he's tried to do this before. In 2021, he tried to get rid of Angela Rayner and messed it up, gave her 6 jobs instead. It seems like he's doing about the same thing with Diane Abbott here. It's not particularly competent, is it?
Look, the first thing to say is that there are more left candidates and left MPs who will be returned to Parliament when Labour wins. And I think at any time in Labour history, and I've been there in the party many, many decades, I was blocked from standing because I was pro-European in the time by the Benite left, manipulating a selection. I suppose I could have run to the papers and said, oh, they're keeping me out because I think being in the European Union is a good idea. No, I just knuckled down and moved on. Diane was a brilliant Cambridge graduate who then went and got a senior job at the Home Office and then moved into politics and has indeed been the great champion of African Caribbean black politicians and championed many of those causes. She's also her own character. She's 70 this year. Some people think you might consider retiring. It's been handled badly. I completely agree with you. But trust me, if you've been in the Labour Party as long as I have, this is quite an old story. One faction gets power and wants to boot out all the other faction, and then it all changes round. I mean, the Corbynites, when they controlled the Labour Party, were not very tender to moderate, pro-European, pro-NATO, pro-market economy MPs they didn't like.
Yeah, Dennis, this Faiza Shaheen, she's very much a darling of the left. She's been campaigning for quite a while, really, for this seat, and she had a huge amount of support in the party. Now, apparently, the reason why she's now not going to be able to stand is because of a few tweets that she liked going back several years. I mean, is that really the right way of deselecting candidates who are already campaigning?
Well, Emma, the great joy of coming on GBNews, I learned so much about the Labour Party I don't know myself. I myself haven't heard of this lady. That's my fault. I mean, I haven't heard of lots of people in politics. You say she's a great darling of the Labour Party.
She wanted to take on Ian Duncan Smith.
Well, Ian Duncan Smith was a failed ex-leader of about 20 years ago. I mean, he's old. He's my vintage. He's not really a very important person anymore.
He was Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. He introduced universal credit.
Yeah,
he lifted up the minimum wage.
Yes, I was Minister of State for Europe and so on and so on and so on. I mean, Ian has been in his own landing on so many issues. Some of them very noble, like Uyghurs and China. Some of them, I think, less pleasant, less agreeable. But it doesn't. I'm not going to argue about Ian Duncan Smith, and I don't know the deals. What I do know is that everybody in both parties now live in terror that at some stage, 1, 2, 3 years ago, exactly as you said, Tom, somebody may have tweeted, retweeted, liked a statement by someone else that's in either the anti-Semitic camp or the racist camp. I mean, Reform have had to dump people, UKIP had to dump people, the Tories have had to dump people, a lot more sexual allegations there amongst Conservative MPs and candidates. This is the unpleasant small change of politics. I wish all politicians were saints and nothing in their past that they regretted. And the Daily Mail, the Daily Telegraph would never, ever accuse Keir Starmer of endorsing someone who'd said something pretty ugly 2 or 3 years ago. I wish I lived in that ideal world.
Now, Dennis, you say that each faction in the Labour Party have their own factional reasons for this factional infighting, and we see it each time, and that's undeniably true. But I would put it to you that what the Corbyn project wanted to do, and lots of people did not like this, was forcing every candidate to go through mandatory reselection every election. So they had to fight a battle to even be the candidate each and every time they wanted to stand. Now, lots of good reasons that was a terrible idea, but it was an open process. The difference now is that this is a closed process. Most candidates assume that they're in their place, and some are being hauled in front of an anonymous committee saying that someone has said that something has happened in the past, or someone's found a tweet, or there's been an anonymous sexual assault complainant, or anything like that, and suddenly, without any due process, they're removed as a candidate.
Well, separate all these things out. There's a famous pamphlet published in 1980 by my dear and close friend Chris Mullin, who's a wonderful writer, a wonderful journalist, a wonderful MP, very close to Tony Benn then. And you saw him outside the Labour Party conferences holding up the pamphlet, how to select and reselect your MP. that was an invitation, not by Chris's Parks, he's a decent, charitable guy, for a cull of anybody that the then left didn't like.
But that's democratic.
Oh, fine. I mean, it's very unpleasant. You're then accused of being disloyal to the party because you support John Smith or you support Harold Wilson, but not the current factional groups. It's like
Thank you very much, Dennis. We're going to have to cross to East London, where police are now providing an update following a shooting in Hackney.
This way, sorry.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Detective Chief Superintendent James Conway, the local policing lead here in Hackney and Tower Hamlets, and I'm joined by the Mayor of Hackney, Caroline Woodley, reflecting the incredible joint working relationship and response to this incident from both the police and the council here in Hackney. It saddens me deeply to say that at about 9:20 last night, on Kingsland High Street in Hackney, 3 men and a 9-year-old girl were shot when a firearm was discharged from a motorbike. I know that local people will be extremely concerned by this incident. We share that concern, and an urgent investigation has been launched to identify and apprehend those responsible. 3 men aged 26, 37 and 42 who were sitting outside a restaurant were taken to hospital for treatment for gunshot wounds. Their conditions are stable, but one potentially faces life-changing injuries. A 9-year-old girl who was inside the restaurant having dinner with her family suffered a gunshot wound, and she remains in hospital in a critical condition. Our thoughts are with her family, and they are being supported, as you would expect, by specialist officers. We do not believe that the girl and the men injured were known to each other. And as with any child, she was an innocent victim of the indiscriminate nature of gun crime. Police arrived at the scene within minutes of the crime being reported, and 2 crime scenes remain in place at Kingsland High Street and Calverston Crescent, where we recovered a motorbike that we believe was used in the shooting and which we now know to have been stolen. The investigation is being led by our specialist crime colleagues, and we're supporting them with specialist local officers as we conduct fast-time inquiries to identify and apprehend those responsible and to establish the motive behind the shooting. The investigation is at an early stage, and we're keeping an open mind as to that motive. We're keen to identify other witnesses who were in the area around the scene at the time of the shooting. Similarly, if you're in Kingsland High Street at the time of the shooting and have information or footage from a phone or another device, please share that with us. This is a fast-moving, complex investigation, and we'll be working closely with our specialist crime colleagues, our partners in the council, and other partners to establish the facts over the coming days. Locally, people can expect to see a significant police and council presence in the area, including armed officers, to provide reassurance and support. We will also continue our unrelenting focus on suppressing violence, gun crime, and the offenders who endanger our communities here in Hackney. Events such as these are rarely spontaneous. Someone knows who was responsible. This was a shooting that's left a little girl fighting for her life. If you have any information that could assist us with the investigation, please do the right thing and make contact with us. You can contact us by calling 101, or if you wish to report information anonymously, you can call Crime Stoppers on 0800 555 111 or report to Crime Stoppers online at crimestoppers-uk.org. Alternatively, to speak to officers directly, you can call our incident room on 0208 345 3865. Please do get in contact with us if you have any information. Thank you for your time.
Live from Hackney, police updates over that shooting of 3 men and 1 child. The 3 men were 26, 37 and 42 years old, and they were sitting outside a cafe on Kingsland High Street. A little girl of 9 years old was inside that cafe and suffered a gunshot wound. She is currently in hospital in a critical condition. The 3 men, meanwhile, are in a stable condition in hospital, although one is likely to have suffered life-changing injuries.
Absolutely shocking incident there in Hackney. The police are, of course, calling out for any witnesses, anyone with any footage, anyone who knows. He made the point that someone out there will know what this was about, will know who committed this crime. They said they found the motorbike involved, that they suspect was involved. They said that the motorbike is stolen. So there's another clue there from the police. But yes, a child in hospital, potentially fighting for her life.
Yeah, and it's interesting how they dwelled upon the fact that the child was not known to those who were performing this shooting, carried out this shooting. To some extent, perhaps leading us to suggest that maybe the 3 men had some sort of connection, that this was some sort of hit job, potentially gang-related. Of course, all speculation at this stage, but a call for evidence from the police.
Well, he said,
an emotional plea there.
He said that there's no connection between the child and the 3 men that were shot as well. But yes, he said that it probably wasn't indiscriminate, or it wasn't. It was probably pre-planned, probably a motive there.
Which means that people will have some information about this out there, and particularly that emotional appeal from the police, whereby they said, look, there is a 9-year-old girl fighting for her life in hospital right now, having suffered a gunshot wound in a critical condition, using that emotional appeal to try and get the people who are living in London, are living likely in and around the Hackney area, who do know the motive here, who do know what caused this horrific crime, to come forward to Crime Stoppers and say what they know.
I mean, how have we got to this place where gun crime in East London is a fact? Shocking, very shocking indeed. Yes, keen to identify any witnesses in the area. I believe we will be checking in with Charlie Peters a little bit later. He's been on the scene, so he'll bring us any further updates on what exactly happened there.
But of course, Gary Lineker says that he continues to tweet so he can look himself in the mirror at night. That's in spite of BBC impartiality rules.
Yes, speaking at the Hay Festival, the Match of the Day presenter said that expressing his opinions publicly felt vital to him. He sparked debate over whether he should be allowed to remain a BBC presenter because of his political social media posts.
So, has Gary Lineker gone too far? Delighted to be joined now by political commentator Joe Phillips, who thinks he should be allowed to tweet and stay at the BBC, and the former BBC presenter Danny Kelly, who thinks he absolutely shouldn't. OK, Danny, let's start with you. What's your case?
Listen, I love Gary Lineker, the footballer. He played for Everton. He scored 40 goals in one season, but I don't like Gary Lineker, the political activist. And Gary Lineker at the Hay Festival said how much he loves the BBC. Well, I can tell you, Lineker, the BBC, it's not reciprocal. When I was at the BBC, plenty of people at the coalface, the shop floor, in the newsroom, were very wary of what was coming next out of Gary Lineker's Twitter feed, because Lineker's a multimillionaire. He's doing more damage to the future of the licence fee than any potential organisation trying to defund the licence fee. I wish he'd rein it in. I wish he'd think of the 18,000 people whose jobs and livelihoods depend on the licence fee. And I'm pro-BBC licence, even though they ditched me for being a 50-year-old white guy 3 years ago. For diversity's sake, I'm still a big fan of the licence fee. I'm not calling for it to be scrapped, but Lineker's doing more harm to it than anyone can imagine. He simply doesn't care.
I mean, Joe Phillips, Danny makes a good point there. It's not fair to the other staff, and it could be actually putting that licence fee at risk, putting the future of the BBC at risk.
I'd say that's absolute cobblers, frankly, Emily. I don't think it's putting the licence fee at risk at all. And don't forget, if you put this in context, Gary Lineker was talking at the Hay Festival this week, and he was talking about the tweets and what led to his suspension from broadcasting a year ago. He wasn't tweeting today. He talked about why he goes on social media. I mean, I don't, but other people do, and I'm sure people do it for the same reasons that Gary Lineker does. He's entitled to his opinion. He's a sports presenter. He's not a news presenter. If you don't like what he says, that's fine. If you like what he says about football and his commentary, that's fine too. But the idea that this is putting people's jobs or the BBC at risk is absolute nonsense. What is actually there is somebody who is an intelligent, articulate person who's got opinions. He's not offensive. And the point he made at Hay was that he was sorry that the BBC ended up as a row between him and the BBC, instead of the BBC and the Daily Mail, which of course sparked the whole thing by taking his comments out of context. So I think, let's be honest, let's be fair. You call yourselves a free speech station. He's not saying anything derogatory or defamatory.
Well, let's throw that back to Danny Kelly. Then this is just about free speech. The guy's a sports presenter.
Yeah, well, she's right. This lady is right. It's about free speech and he's allowed to do it. But what isn't cobblers is how BBC staff feel about Lineker. And whether the lady thinks that it's nonsense that Gary Lineker is somehow single-handedly going to destroy the future of the licence fee, if you were to go out on the streets and ask people about how they feel about the BBC and opponents and critics of the funding model, and then you ask them to extrapolate, I guarantee you Lineker would come up in the top 3. And the second one might be about political or perceived political bias. And the third one might be about the cost. So it might be cobblers to this lady, but it's not cobblers to the vast majority, I would think, of the
Joe, isn't there a point that, junior members of staff wouldn't be able to get away with what Gary's tweeted over the years?
Well, first of all, hello, Danny. My name's Joe.
Yes, Joe Phillips.
Let's say hello. Let's not refer to that lady or she. I don't think it's right for you to make. I don't think it's right for you to make allegations about how staff might feel about Gary Lineker without him being able to defend himself.
Joe. Joe, I've worked at the BBC for 18 years.
But I'm just saying that I don't think you should make claims about how other people might feel about Gary Lineker when he is not here to defend himself. And it is quite clear that there are guidelines that the BBC has drawn up, and in fact, Gary Lineker was involved in the redrafting of the guidelines on social media.
That's quite a special privilege, though, isn't it? That's quite a special privilege.
Yeah. What have I said, Joe, that would need Gary Lineker to defend himself? What have I said? Have I defamed him? Have I cast spurious allegations? All I've said is that he's unpopular at the BBC.
The inference is that people within the BBC don't like what Gary Lineker does, but they're too frightened to say anything. Okay.
I haven't said anything about being frightened. When did I say that? You put words in my mouth. All I'm doing is saying that in my 18 years of experience, when Lineker was on Twitter, a lot of people were worried about what he was going to say next. Now, what have I done that Lineker needs to defend him?
Well, what were they worried about? The inference was that they were worried about their jobs and their future because you said he was threatening the BBC.
Oh, I think Danny might not be able to hear you anymore. But, Joe, we've heard both sides of the debate. Thank you very much indeed. And, yes, okay. Joe Phillips, not this lady, and, of course, Danny Kelly there, both who have worked at the BBC. So it's good to get those two perspectives from people who have been inside the institution itself.
Let's return now to East London, where police have just confirmed that a 9-year-old girl remains in critical condition following a drive-by shooting last night. Well, we're joined by GBNews reporter Charlie Peters, who is listening to the press conference. Charlie, you're in Hackney. What more do we know?
Well, we've just been told by the local policing lead in this area that a 9-year-old girl is fighting for her life in a London hospital at the moment after a shooting last night. 3 other victims were caught up in the attack, 3 men, aged 26, 37 and 42. Their conditions remain stable, although one man faces potentially life-changing injuries. The police also said that they do not believe that the 9-year-old girl and the 3 men are connected in any way. The 9-year-old girl was inside the restaurant on the Kingsland High Street, just behind me here, where she was having a meal with her family and was hit in what the police are describing as an indiscriminate attack. The officer also said that he knows that local people will be particularly concerned by last night's attack. It happened about 9:20 last night, and there was a surge of policing and ambulance activity here last night. We saw the Special Task Force, the Territorial Support Group, and specialist firearms officers on the scene. The superintendent here confirmed that there will be a continued police and council presence at a heightened level in the coming days, which will include armed officers patrolling this area. They don't have a suspect at the moment. An urgent investigation is ongoing. And the police also confirmed that there are 2 crime scenes. Not only the restaurant on the high street, some 100 yards up the road from where I am now, but also a crescent nearby where a motorbike was recovered. This was a drive-by shooting where a firearm was discharged from the motorbike last night. That bike has now been recovered. The police have confirmed that it was stolen last night. They said that the 9-year-old girl was an innocent victim of the indiscriminate nature of gun crime. Fast time inquiries are now needed to apprehend those responsible. The police did say this investigation is at an early stage. They are keen to identify other witnesses. They've also sent out an appeal to people in the public to come forward with any information they have on 101. And if you were there last night, they said if you took any footage on your mobile phone, they want to see that as well as those inquiries continue.
Thank you very much indeed. Charlie Peters there, our reporter in Hackney on the scene of that quadruple shooting. We're going to take a quick break, but coming up, the jury on Donald Trump's hush money trial is on day 2 of its deliberations. The big question, could he be found guilty? We'll bring you the latest.
Hi there and welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. A lot of cloud today with some heavy showers around, but also some brighter spells, particularly towards the north and northwest. Higher pressure is building in, but it's taking its time. Low pressure still with us. That's carrying a couple of weather fronts into eastern parts of the UK. So some longer spells of rain there from Teesside down towards Norfolk. A lot of cloud as well, and a cool breeze from the North Sea. Otherwise, it's a mix of bright spells and showers. The heaviest downpours with some thunder and hail likely from the Midlands down towards the southeast. Where we do get some brighter spells, though, it's going to feel a bit more pleasant and a drier day for the north and northwest compared with Wednesday. However, the focus for the heavy downpours will be across the south and southeast, particularly through central southern England into southeast and East Anglia, and also through the Midlands. But for Wales, for northern England, for Scotland and Northern Ireland, well, there will be some sunny spells in between the showers. And although a cool breeze is blowing from the north-northwest, it's going to feel pleasant where we do get some of those sunny spells coming through. Now into the evening, we're going to see increasingly those showers disappear. Clear spells breaking out widely, particularly towards the west, although there will be some cloud remaining in the east and some outbreaks of rain running down the North Sea coast. Where we got the cloud, temperatures staying in the double figures. Where we've got the clear spells, especially for Western Scotland and Northern Ireland, temperatures dipping into the mid-single figures. So we start off Friday with a lot of cloud in the east and central part of England, some outbreaks of rain turning to showers by the afternoon. Again, some heavy downpours for East Anglia and the southeast, but a much drier day elsewhere and plenty of sunshine for Scotland, Northern Ireland, West Wales and the southwest, where we've got the sunshine feeling very pleasant indeed with temperatures into the high teens or low 20s.
The latest GB News travel.
The southbound side of the M1 seeing slow traffic to an earlier lane closure whilst emergency road repairs took place. All lanes have reopened, but delays remain between Barnsley South at 36 to Rotherham at 35. Coastbound on the M20, speed restrictions due to Operation Brock, where all the freight traffic heading for the Channel crossing must go through the Combs area, and that's between junctions 8 for Leeds Castle through to 9 for Ashford. Your diversion is in place. Kingsland High High Street in Dalston in London, the A10, that's now closed in both directions whilst the police deal with an incident. The closure is between the Dalston Junction through to the Crossway. All diversion routes again in place and extra traffic to be expected. That's the very latest travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 42 minutes past 1. Now, jurors in Trump's hush money trial have entered their second day of deliberations today, and their verdict could upend his campaign.
Yes, Donald Trump is charged with falsifying business documents to cover up a payment to adult film star Stormy Daniels. He's the first US president ever to be charged with a crime.
Well, to tell us more, we're joined by our GB News reporter, Ray Addison, who's been following this case more carefully than I think anyone else I know. Ray, what on earth is going on?
Well, as you said, this is the second day. This is the first full day of deliberations. Jury started about 13 minutes ago. Yesterday, we saw some quite controversial jury instructions which were given to those jurors from Judge Juan Merchan. Now, just a quick reminder of what Trump's been charged with. 34 felony counts. The prosecution's claiming that he has illegally falsified business records to cover up hush money paid to Stormy Daniels to stop her going public with claims of a sexual encounter from a decade earlier, back in 2006. Now, falsifying business records, normally under New York state law, that is a misdemeanor. But the Manhattan District Attorney has bumped those charges up, saying that by disguising the payment, Trump had committed another crime. Right, what's that other crime? Well, very controversially, during the jury instructions, which lasted for 3 hours, by the way, the judge told the jury that they could pick what they think the other crime is from a menu of crimes, if you like. Is it a tax crime? Is it a violation of state law or a violation of federal law? And they don't all have to agree. So 4 could decide that he's guilty of a tax crime. 4 could decide that he's guilty of a state federal crime, and so on. You see where I'm going with this. So ultimately, Donald Trump could be found guilty of this crime without all of the jurors agreeing on exactly what crime he has committed, which a lot of commentators will find very, very confusing. Now, the jury themselves, they appear confused last night. They asked the judge to send them a transcript of an hour's worth of his instructions. They needed to go back over it. They also asked to see transcripts of evidence provided by Michael Cohen, former Trump fixer, the star witness for the prosecution, and also some evidence from the publisher in the sort of catch and kill scheme, if you like, David Pecker. So when's this jury going to come back? We're not quite sure. See, this is, like I said, the first full day of deliberations, but the longer they stay out, the better it could be for Trump. However, a lot of concern that the judge has given the jury a lot of leeway to find Trump guilty. He says it's a fix. This is him speaking the other day outside the courthouse.
These charges are rigged. The whole thing is rigged. The whole country's a mess between the borders and fake elections, and you have a trial like this where the judge is so conflicted he can't breathe. He's got to do his job, and it's not for me, that I can tell you.
So Donald Trump claiming that this is all motivated by Biden. Biden has strenuously denied that. However, what we saw the other day was Robert De Niro coming down outside of the courthouse to make a speech on behalf of the Biden-Harris campaign. And it didn't exactly go according to plan. Let's hear what Robert De Niro had to say.
Donald Trump wants to destroy not only the city, but the country, and eventually he could destroy the world. If he gets in, I can tell you right now, he will never leave. He will never leave. You know that. He will never leave. What does that mean? Is that the country we want to live in? Do we want him running this country and saying, I'm not leaving, I'm dictator for life?
So one of the supporters setting off a car alarm there. He then went on to get booed. People were accusing each other of being traitors. He got booed out of the courthouse area. But a lot of people saying that this has put that question of impartiality in some significant doubt.
God, it's all a mess. Why do the Democrats always roll out actors? I'd much rather listen to someone who is sort of a legal boffin than what Robert De Niro has to say about his fantasy about America sliding into dictatorship. Well, Ray Addison, thank you so much for bringing us the facts of that case. Really, really appreciate it.
Oh, goodness me, what drama. Anyway, coming up, restaurants are reporting a rise in dine and dash offences. People are running away from paying. We'll be joined by a restaurant owner. See how big this problem is.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Joint CEO at the UK Sepsis Trust, Dr. Ron Daniels. Very good to see you this morning. Why is it with sepsis we sort of hear very little about it in day-to-day life until there's either a big story or a big tragedy? Why is that? Is it common?
Well, it's astonishing, isn't it? We have a condition here that affects nearly 250,000 people across the UK each year and claims 48,000 lives. And just for context, breast cancer, and I'm not diminishing how horrible that can be, claims 11,000 lives. So sepsis is 4 times more prolific as a killer. I think the reason we don't hear about it is because it doesn't really belong to any particular speciality of doctors. It touches every aspect of healthcare, and therefore there's no professional group to be championing it, which means it needs an advocacy organisation like ours.
My understanding is that it's when your own immune system starts to attack the tissues, but by the time people realise that their temperature isn't just flu or something, they can often be in quite a perilous state.
It arises in people of any age, people with whether or not they've got underlying illness, and it can arise as a consequence of any infection. So it presents hugely differently.
So what do we do?
If you're concerned something is devastatingly wrong, there are 6 key symptoms to look for, and they spell the word sepsis. S for slurred speech or confusion. E for extreme pain in the muscles or joints. P for passing no urine, no water in a day. S for severe breathlessness. I for it feels like I'm going to die, and people really do say that. And then the final S for skin that's mottled or discoloured or very pale. Any one of those 6 in the context of infection, it's go straight to A&E.
The People's Channel.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do. His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, unlike you. That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frosty in here, isn't it?
He'll have one of me one day.
For dartball practice. Britain's newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 9 minutes to 2. Now, do you like your food to go? Well, restaurants are facing a surge in dine and dash offences, where customers leave without paying their bills.
It's an outrage. Some blame the cost of living crisis. Others put it down to the authorities not taking the crime seriously. What's the truth behind this? Joining us now to discuss this is restaurateur and cookery school owner Giancarlo Caldesi. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I mean, this is such a liberty. People eating, dining, having a bottle of wine and then running out without paying. How common is this?
Fortunately, it's quite common. It's happened in my restaurant already a few times. And one bill was about £600, actually. So they just was a family, 1 left, 2 left, and then they found an excuse that the food wasn't good. They were so upset. And end of story, I was left with a bill of £600. But this is not just the first time, it's not the second time, it's not the third time. Now people finding excuses of really saying, oh, the food is not that good. They have to find one excuse to really put us in such a position in front of other guests.
And I bet they've eaten it all. I bet they've eaten it all and drank it all.
They live a little bit, and so it is a problem. But in my new restaurant, another restaurant, we have a CCTV camera now, quite entrance, watching all the tables. And I've reported this to the police. And as a matter of fact, one family was caught in Covent Garden, the same family that did the same to us in Marylebone Lane.
Oh, it's
so,
always the repeat offenders. It's always a small proportion of people committing a huge proportion of the crime. Giancarlo, I want to ask you, this one example of £600, this doesn't sound like it's people on the breadline. This doesn't sound like it's people who are suffering under the cost of living crisis. These are thieves who would do it just for, not because they need to eat, but because they're greedy and nasty and low-life people.
Correct. But unfortunately, I was left with a woman dealing with that, and I couldn't really stop her, because if you use force, then you're in trouble. I think us restaurateurs, we need to take a precaution to have everything on CCTV camera and report the crime. We must report the crime. We must. And also we must share it with all our restaurateurs around us, because unfortunately what the people do, they go round and round, they do the rounds, and they know what to say. They really are so smart. They are so seriously smart that for us it's so difficult to argue in front of other guests, which are really nice and they want a nice evening. They put the restaurant in jeopardy because arguing in front of someone is so difficult, guys.
Yeah,
it
you
really
don't want to
makes
do
us.
You don't want to ruin the atmosphere for everyone else.
Also, they think we are bullies, you know.
Yeah, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for coming on the show. Really great to get your perspective.
You're very welcome.
Good luck with the Dine and Dashers, Giancarlo Caldesi. Absolutely outrageous.
Quarter of them.
Absolutely outrageous thing to do.
Absolutely, and it's always people who aren't on the breadline. But coming up, Angela Rayner is backing Diane Abbott. What's going on? That next.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. A lot of cloud today with some heavy showers around, but also some brighter spells, particularly towards the north and northwest. Higher pressure is building in, but it's taking its time. Low pressure still with us. That's carrying a couple of weather fronts into eastern parts of the UK. So some longer spells of rain there from Teesside down towards Norfolk. A lot of cloud as well, and a cool breeze from the North Sea. Otherwise, it's a mix of bright spells and showers. The heaviest downpours with some thunder and hail likely from the Midlands down towards the southeast. Where we do get some brighter spells, though, it's going to feel a bit more pleasant and a drier day for the north and northwest compared with Wednesday. However, the focus for the heavy downpours will be across the south and southeast, particularly through central southern England into southeast and East Anglia, and also through the Midlands. But for Wales, for Northern England, for Scotland and Northern Ireland, well, there will be some sunny spells in between the showers. And although a cool breeze is blowing from the north-northwest, it's going to feel pleasant where we do get some of those sunny spells coming through. Now into the evening, we're going to see increasingly those showers disappear. Clear spells breaking out widely, particularly towards the west, although there will be some cloud remaining in the east and some outbreaks of rain running down the North Sea coast. Where we got the cloud, temperatures staying in the double figures. Where we've got the clear spells, especially for Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, temperatures dipping into the mid-single figures. So we start off Friday with a lot of cloud in the east and central part of England, some outbreaks of rain turning to showers by the afternoon. Again, some heavy downpours for East Anglia and the southeast, but a much drier day elsewhere and plenty of sunshine for Scotland, Northern Ireland, West Wales and the southwest, where we've got the sunshine feeling very pleasant indeed with temperatures into the high teens or low 20s.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
You really could be our next big winner with an incredible £20,000 in tax-free cash to play with this summer. What would you spend that on? Well, whilst you're thinking about it, listen to some of our previous winners getting that winning phone call from us.
You're the winner of the Great British giveaway.
I'm slipping egg. Oh dear.
Oh my God, are you joking?
Do you know what? I've never won anything like this in my life.
Oh my God, this is amazing. Thank you.
Hurry, as lines close on Friday. For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got, in my opinion? The best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Thursday, the 30th of May. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emily Carver.
Angela Rayner backs Diane Abbott amid the ongoing row with her party candidacy, adding it was not a great look. This civil war rages on within the Labour Party. Has Rayner just made Starmer's life very difficult?
And no deal with the Tories. Those are the words of Reform leader Richard Tice, who says Rishi Sunak's party doesn't own Conservatism, but is he just hurting his own chances of securing MPs in the general election?
And Kensington Palace confirms that the Princess of Wales will not take part in the Colonel's review as she's continuing her cancer recovery.
Curious, Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, making things difficult for Keir Starmer. What is she playing at?
Well, it's happened once before, of course. After the local election results in 2021, when the Labour Party not only lost loads of seats, Boris Johnson surged ahead, there was the vaccine bounce, the Hartlepool by-election was won. Well, Keir Starmer went into panic mode, as he sometimes does, tried to sack Angela Rayner in a reshuffle, and ended up having to give her 5 or 6 new jobs instead. So you do get this sort of tension at the top of the Labour Party between Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner. She's a strong, powerful left-wing figure in the Labour Party and can push back against Starmer, and sometimes he acquiesces.
Yeah, contradicting him in public, in the media. She said, I don't see any reason why Diane Abbott can't stand as a Labour MP going forward. I am saying that as the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party. Very much stamping her authority. Stamping her authority there, isn't she, Angela Rayner?
And this is a question mark, because so far we've seen a relatively united Labour Party over the last 12 months. When things are going their way, they can all sort of sing from the same hymn sheet. But of course, we're starting to see those cracks now. And what will a Labour Party do in government? They haven't announced many plans. I suppose a big question for people will how much influence will Angela Rayner have over Keir Starmer with her all her new plans for these new regulations, stopping the restrictions on trade unions, striking, and of course more impositions on businesses. Added to that, further left-wing candidates starts to see the Starmer project not looking as sure as it was before.
She doesn't want to upset her left-wing fans. Anyway, gbnews.com/your say is the way to get in touch, but it's your headlines with Tatiana.
Emily, thank you very much and good afternoon. The top stories from the GB newsroom. Labour's deputy leader says she doesn't see any reason why Diane Abbott cannot stand as an MP with the party at the general election. According to reports in The Guardian, Angela Rayner believes Ms Abbott hasn't been treated fairly or appropriately. The veteran MP had the Labour whip restored this week after a long suspension. She's accused Sir Keir Starmer of culling the party's left wing. But Sir Keir Starmer says he wants the highest quality candidates and described her as a trailblazer. Meanwhile, Labour's election campaign is continuing, with the party's leader assuring voters that pledges to cut NHS waiting lists won't require any new taxes.
Every proposal that we put on the table is fully costed and fully funded. And we've been really clear about not raising income tax and NI. And we've said repeatedly that nothing in our plans require us to raise tax. And that's why we've been able to set out our position on VAT as well. And that's in stark contrast to a government that's taken the tax burden on working people to the highest level since the war. And during this campaign is showing it hasn't learned the lesson, because it is putting unfunded tax commitment on the table on top of unfunded tax commitment.
Businesses hiring foreign workers should be subject to an employer immigration tax. That is according to the Reform UK party. At a campaign event in London, Reform's leader Richard Tice said the new levy would help end what he called a deadly addiction to cheap overseas labour. Joined by the party's honorary president Nigel Farage, they claimed that mass immigration had driven down wages for British citizens.
There are 9.2 million people here in the UK that are economically inactive. There are well over 5 million people that are on out-of-work benefits. So don't tell me there's a shortage of labour. I think for too many people, work doesn't pay. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to overcome this addiction. If you want to bring in people from overseas, then there's a price to that. Because this great country of ours, this incredible nation, we've all paid for it over decades and decades. So it's not unreasonable to expect you to chip in a bit.
Meanwhile, the leader of the Liberal Democrats has pledged to improve mental health among young people and children across the country. Sir Ed Davey is campaigning in Frome today. He says his party would treble taxes for social media firms to fund a mental health professional in every primary and secondary school.
Today, the Lib Democrats have got a really important message on mental health, our children's mental health. And my colleagues Manira Wilson and Daisy Cooper have been out there. I'm talking to you now about our policy is to get a qualified mental health professional in every school, in our primary schools and our secondary schools. And only the Lib Democrats are arguing for that with a costed programme. It's so important. Our children's mental health has never been in such a crisis. Huge waiting lists for help. And it's not just about their health now, it's how it impacts their whole future.
A 9-year-old girl remains in a critical condition this afternoon after a shooting on a busy high street in East London last night. The child was with her family inside a restaurant on Kingsland High Road in Hackney when shots were fired from a motorbike outside. Speaking a short time ago, Chief Superintendent James Conway issued an appeal for anyone with any information to come forward.
An urgent investigation has been launched to identify and apprehend those responsible. 3 men aged 26, 37 and 42 who were sitting outside a restaurant were taken to hospital for treatment for gunshot wounds. Their conditions are stable, but one potentially faces life-changing injuries. A 9-year-old girl who was inside the restaurant having dinner with her family suffered a gunshot wound, and she remains in hospital in a critical condition.
Some breaking news. Hundreds of Border Force officers at Heathrow Airport will launch a 3-day strike from tomorrow in a dispute over working hours. The Public and Commercial Services Union says more than 500 of its members working on passport control will walk out in a protest against new rosters. And the King will take part in the Trooping the Colours ceremony next month, though the Princess of Wales will be absent as she continues her recovery from cancer. His Majesty will inspect the soldiers from a carriage rather than the traditional horseback. The celebration sees the royal family gather on the balcony of Buckingham Palace after a display of military pageantry. It'll take place in London on the 15th of June. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Tom and Emily.
Right, well, it's 2:08. Good afternoon, Britain. Now, at a campaign event earlier this afternoon, Reform UK leader Richard Tice, he pledged to create an employer immigration tax to cure what he called the UK's deadly addiction to cheap overseas labour.
Well, he was joined on the stage by the party's honorary president, Nigel Farage, although some would be forgiven for thinking, is this the real leader? The pair claimed that mass immigration was unfair on the British public because it had worsened the housing crisis and suppressed wages.
They also ruled out any kind of election pact with the Conservatives. That did seem to be a little bit up for debate,
it did.
didn't it, for a while?
Although the Conservatives, of course, ruled it out last night, so perhaps that made the decision easier. But let's speak to someone who is at the event. And Mark, you managed to ask a question of these two men. First of all, though, is this a change in policy from Reform? They were talking about net zero immigration before. Have they ditched that original pledge?
Well, it was a question I put to Richard Tice later on as well. Are they actually conceding that mass migration is perhaps a good thing if they're looking to raise some £20 billion within the first parliamentary term? And he said, you know, dealing with reality, they will look to tax and get as much in the way of a return for those people that employers may feel that they need to take over from other countries to the UK to be employed. Now, they used very deliberately the highly emotive and charged language of drug abuse to talk about the very deadly addiction, as they see it, of cheap foreign labour that they claim the UK is addicted to. They say that Labour and the Conservatives are pushing this drug on every street corner, and their cure is this employer immigration tax. Now, there would be certain exemptions. It is effectively a levy to national insurance, going up from 13.8 to 20% if you're employing a foreign worker. But if you're a business employing 5 or fewer members of staff, then you would be exempt from that employer immigration tax. And also, if you're a healthcare provider, you would also be exempt. But I also asked, you mentioned in your introduction there about this issue that people have got rather interested in, with Nigel Farage talking to The Sun on Harry Cole's podcast yesterday about whether there might be a deal to be done with the Tories. Well, Nigel Farage was very quick to slap that down. He said, you guys need to get a sense of humour, that it was very tongue-in-cheek, that he's not looking at any kind of a deal, that he did the biggest imaginable favour for the Conservatives in 2019 in standing down candidates then, and the same is not going to happen. And that is exactly what was reiterated by Richard Tice when I spoke to him a short time ago.
Absolutely not. Look, we trusted them in 19. We gave them a massive majority. We're not going to trust them again. But
it might be your only way, really, to secure a candidate.
No, absolute nonsense. We're going to win seats. I've no doubt about that. And the point is, they don't own conservatism. They don't own the right to govern in perpetuity. If you do a bad job, eventually you're going to get fired.
And one other point, we were talking today, obviously, about legal migration, but I asked Richard Tice with regard to illegal migration, whether he was still wedded to this policy of turning back the boats, or at least picking up the migrants from small boats and then landing them back on French shores, knowing that that would lead, of course, to a very difficult situation as far as relations with our closest continental neighbour is concerned. He said absolutely that he is, that France would see, as he sees it, see sense that this is the right policy to do that, to have in France a system of processing applications in that country before anybody is considered for asylum here in the UK.
I mean, Mark, this employer immigration tax, it seems rather a complicated way to try and get numbers down of legal immigration. I wonder why they didn't just go for a cap.
Well, indeed. I mean, that is a very pertinent question. And there's also the issue, I think, of how much money will they raise at the end of the day. I mean, they're estimating up to £20 million, but many small businesses will be exempt, as we say, if they're employing 5 or fewer people. And also the healthcare sector, which is a huge proportion of the numbers who are coming across in any given year, they're going to be exempt from that tax as well. So will it actually raise as much as Reform are saying it will? Remains to be seen, of course, but hey, that's their policy.
Yes, and presumably to make more money for the Treasury, you'd have more foreign workers coming over. So there's almost a weird incentive there. Anyway, thank you very much indeed, Mark White, Home and Security Editor. Thank you very much indeed.
Emily, were you suggesting that this is a pro-migration policy potentially?
Well, it kind of sounds a little bit as though it is, because what if lots of businesses are more than happy to pay a little more national insurance to get foreign workers?
Yeah, I suppose the government could issue more visas under this scheme, and that would bring in more direct taxation.
And is it to try and get money for the Treasury, or is it to try and cut immigration? I'm slightly confused. Let me know if you are. Maybe you think this is a fantastic idea and that actually this is quite a bold policy announcement here from the Reform Party. I think there are a few holes. There are a few holes, but yes. That's just my view.
Well, it seems that every party seems to be having a bit of a problem at the moment, because not just is the Conservative Party 20 points behind in the polls, the Reform Party is having questions raised over its immigration policy, but the Labour Party has an internal battle. The deputy leader of the party has backed Diane Abbott, saying that she doesn't think there's any reason why the veteran MP shouldn't stand. It all adds to this row over Diane Abbott's future.
Yes, exactly. Well, let's speak to our political correspondent, Catherine Forster, in Wales. I mean, Catherine, Angela Rayner is not known for being a wallflower. She speaks her mind. But is it a bit surprising that she'd speak out so openly in favour of Diane Abbott?
Well, I mean, you don't mess with Angela Rayner, and I think she feels that in her position as deputy leader of the Labour Party, she can say this. It's all gone a bit wrong, hasn't it, this thing with Diane Abbott, because what was supposed to happen was that they were supposed to give the whip back to her in an orderly fashion. Of course, she was over a year without it after writing that opinion piece over a year ago. And she was supposed to be given the whip back. Then she would, in due course, have announced that she had decided to retire, not stand in the next election. But of course, the next election came much, much sooner than Labour, or indeed any of us, were expecting. And so, of course, Labour were caught on the hop. And then we had this briefing to the Times newspaper the other day saying that she had been banned from standing, which really set the cat among the pigeons, because at that point she didn't even have the Labour whip back. So everything sort of happened not in the right order. She was deeply upset and absolutely furious. It's caused a huge row, a lot of confusion. Is she banned? Is she not? It's now clear that she hasn't been banned as yet. That's a decision for the NEC early next week. And Angela Rayner, Keir Starmer hasn't given a view either way, whether he wants her in or out. He's just said it's up to the NEC to make that decision. Today, he's paying a really sort of big tribute to her. He used very different language, saying that she was a trailblazer, she'd overcome incredible challenges and horrendous abuse. But Angela Rayner going that bit further, as she has a habit of doing, and saying, well, I don't see any reason why she shouldn't stand if she wants to for Labour. She also says, though, that it had been the expectation that Diane Abbott had been going to retire, and that also she's not very happy with this briefing from some Labour source to the newspapers. I'm sure she shares that with Sir Keir Starmer, because this is a real unnecessary distraction. Not a good look for a party, you know. Diane Abbott was,
Catherine, your line is unfortunately breaking up. We'll have to leave it there. But Catherine Forster, thank you very much indeed, our political correspondent there.
Yes.
The latest.
Curiouser and curiouser. Well, shall we get some more analysis now with our political editor, Christopher Hope? He's been travelling through Buckinghamshire with the Prime Minister's party. And Christopher, there's an enormous green machine behind you. Tell us more.
Hard to miss.
Well, I'm in with a manufacturer in Buckinghamshire, where we expect the Prime Minister shortly to arrive here. The Tories are slightly taking it easy today in terms of being on the front foot with politics, given what's happening with the Labour Party. They're pushing very hard the idea they won't increase VAT. There's a new advert from the Tory party. If you think Labour will win, start saving. But just listen to Catherine Forster there with that excellent report on Labour. I mean, this is a disaster for Sir Keir Starmer. Just earlier, Diane Abbott published a letter online from 6 general secretaries of unions, some of whom are big donors to the Labour Party, notably Unite, Sharon Graham, other unions there, ASLEF, the TSSA. They are saying that she should be allowed to stand in Hackney as the candidate at the election on July the 4th. If you add to that the pressure from Angela Rayner now this lunchtime, who's normally normally a deputy leader is meant to be quite quiet, works with the grassroots, supports the leader. Instead, she's turned it on its head with these remarks. They are brutally timed for Keir Starmer. The NEC meets early next week. This weekend now is all about Labour and all about Sir Keir Starmer's authority. And as Jeremy Hunt said, the Chancellor, in an interview earlier, if Keir Starmer can't deal with Diane Abbott, how can he deal with Vladimir Putin? And that's why it's going down to an authority question about the Labour leader. He's got to get ahead of this quickly. And that's why the Tories, well, they're quite relaxed today, I think, in Buckinghamshire.
Yeah, it's remarkable. Keir Starmer was trying to present himself as prime ministerial, trying to present himself as a man in command. And yet today he looks like a man that's being beaten around by various Corbynite-adjacent individuals, the trade unions and his own deputy. I mean, he doesn't look like a leader at all today.
Well, yes, I mean, you might say that, Tom. I mean, they would disagree. I mean, they would say he's in Wales, setting out the 6 steps in Wales. But don't forget, he's sharing a platform there with Vaughan Gething, who is facing an unprecedented no-confidence vote next week in the Welsh Senate. So, I mean, it is interesting how you are so far ahead in the polls, and yet these issues come from you from left field. I mean, the issue of candidate selection will be resolved by early next week, both for the Tory party, I should say, and for the Labour Party and all the other parties. But this is a headache he can do without, I think, Keir Starmer. And it is turning now, as we speak this lunchtime, into a test of his authority.
And Christopher, are we expecting any more bold new pledges from the Conservatives? We had the National Service, didn't we? What else did we have?
We had the quadruple lock or double lock, triple lock squared, or whatever it is. And, of course, we had we had yesterday's announcement on university.
Yes.
It seems like each day we're getting a new policy from the Tories. They're really trying to... This is the first day... This is the first day in 3 days, Christopher, that we haven't had a policy announcement from the Conservative Party.
Well, yeah, the pledge overnight in an article in today's Daily Telegraph by Jeremy Hunt, and then also said on air on GBNews and elsewhere, is no increase in VAT from the current rate or top rate of 20%.
Yeah.
Of course,
I wouldn't call that a policy, though. That's just saying I'm not going to change things.
OK, fair enough. But that's what they're saying to us today, Tom.
Yeah, no,
fair
it's
enough.
interesting.
Fair enough.
It's interesting. I think it does feed into this idea that the Tories probably feel like what's going on right now with Labour means that they can take a bit of a back foot, dare I say it, Christopher, in sleepy Buckinghamshire.
Yeah, I mean, they're pushing out hard into, you know, they want to hold these seats against insurgent Liberal Democrats. That's why they're here. But yeah, no question. I mean, they are able to take. They've hit the ground running, the Tory party, I think, with all these core policies they put forward with old people and national surrogate umbrella. I mean, it's pouring with rain now in Buckinghamshire.
Oh no!
You've been better prepared than the Prime Minister was last week, Christopher. You actually got an umbrella.
Oh my gosh, was it only last week? Wow.
Even for GB News viewers, I'm going to stay dry. Even for GB News viewers, I'm not that desperate. But no, I should say no. I mean, you have seen a kind of core vote policy in the first 8 days of this campaign. We're waiting to see what we'll really see from other policies from the Tory party. They get quite clear they want to cut back on the benefits bill to fund future spending, and we're not hearing that from the Labour Party. So it really is turning to a difficult day for Keir Starmer and a rare easier day for Rishi Sunak.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, Christopher.
We'll let you get dry.
Why is Buckinghamshire sleepy, Tom?
I think people choose to live in Buckinghamshire because they want a bit of a slower life.
I don't think so. You've got Aylesbury. You've got
Milton Keynes, I suppose. But I think it's fair to describe certain parts of the country as wanting to be not the biggest metropolis.
I thought it was
in the
commuter
world.
belt city.
I think Buckinghamshire is relatively sleepy, and people delight in that. Huh. But I'm also delighted that our very own political editor seems to be better prepared for weather and the glories of British. It's still May. It's the last day of May, and the glories of British spring.
The glories of British spring. Anyway, coming up, we'll be getting all the very latest on the shocking drive-by shooting in Hackney, which has left a 9-year-old girl in a critical condition in hospital.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight, every night from 11 p.m.
The Washington Post estimates that $50 billion was pledged by giant corporate donors over the last few years. Mega funders like George Soros, who dropped $220 million into fancy non-profits, and a lot of ordinary people sent in small donations. So where did all this money go? I mean, small organisations were raising insane amounts of money just through QR codes, sticking them up on posters and on the internet, on social media, and getting huge amounts of money. Where did it go? Well, we can see that quite a lot of it got spent on fun stuff for the organisers. So, I mean, Patrice Cullors, the founder of Black Lives Matter, we know that she bought, or Black Lives Matter on her behalf bought this luxury villa that she's like, oh, we're going to use it for community workshops or whatever. Yeah, that, and living in, and also her brother's business got paid, nearly $1 million.
Security.
And her baby daddy got paid nearly $1 million to provide creative consultancy services. I'm thinking about,
as you said at the top here, finally journalists are looking into this, and it's ridiculous that this amount of money hasn't really been explored, because when they did say, hey, what have you done with this money, of course what she said was basically, you're being massively racist, how dare you?
You're racist, look over there.
Yeah, essentially. And then some people went, oh, OK, yeah, sorry, we didn't mean to question you. So the figures that have been raised are astounding. And, yeah, as some of the stuff is just mental, like, and multi-million-pound homes, dollar homes.
But it's good, so the money got spent on having fun instead of, like, it would have just been, like, annoying community projects to create more racism.
Yeah. What they're really not ready for, the media,
lives.
they're still calling it the killing of George Floyd. Many people think he died of an OD. That's the next level they're not ready for.
The People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 27 minutes past 2. Now, a 9-year-old girl remains in a critical condition in hospital following a shooting in East London last night.
Yes, 3 men who are sitting outside a restaurant in Hackney are also being treated with gunshot wounds.
Well, a stolen motorbike, believed to have been used in the drive-by shooting, has since been recovered by the police.
Yes, well, we're joined by GB News reporter Charlie Peters, who has been on the scene. What do we know, Charlie?
Well, it is a shocking story, Emily, and there are now 2 crime scenes involved in this incident. Not only the restaurant where the shooting happened at 9:20 last night, but also a crescent no more than about 150 metres southeast of that restaurant where this motorbike was recovered soon after. The police alerted us of that revelation in the last hour at a press conference where they said that the motorbike was stolen when they recovered it. They worked out that it had been used for the crime. And the girl, they said, the 9-year-old in a serious critical condition, fighting for her life in a London hospital, was not connected to the 3 men who were also injured in this attack. The men are 26, 37 and 42 years old each, and they are in stable conditions, although one man is facing potentially life-changing injuries. The 9-year-old girl was having a dinner with her family at the time, so a really appalling situation last night. And as you can imagine, the London Ambulance Service and the police flooded the scene last night. Footage we've seen of specialist firearms officers and also several vans from the Met's Special Task Force turning up. Now, the local detective chief superintendent for the Hackney area told us in the last hour that there will now be a surge in the area, not only of council and police staff, but specifically firearms officers, to reassure the local population after what has been an appalling situation. They said this was a fast-moving investigation in its early stages, which indicates they don't have a suspect at the moment, but they did urge any members of the public who witnessed the scenes last night on the Kingsland High Street in Dalston to get in touch. They also said that if anyone recorded any footage at the scene, particularly on mobile phones, they wanted to see that. So this shooting, a mass shooting at 9:20 last night in East London, as you can imagine, had a devastating impact in the local community. People we spoke to this morning were shocked by the scene. Many people reported also hearing a police helicopter soon after searching for that suspect, a single suspect in a drive-by shooting from a motorbike that was abandoned near the scene.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Charlie Peters, for reporting on what is a horrific story. I mean, Hackney, Tom, is, it's probably got quite a high crime rate, but a drive-by shooting, it's just beyond.
Yeah. Just a little girl in a restaurant with a family.
Yeah, terrible. Shall we bring you some more news from the Labour Party? Faiza Shaheen, this is the activist who was planning to run against Ian Duncan Smith. She wanted to nab his seat.
She had been a candidate in 2019. She was a candidate until about 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, well, she's come out and she's claiming that she's faced a systematic campaign of racism, Islamophobia and bullying, and she's very much putting it to Keir Starmer.
Wow.
So we'll see how that evolves. But yeah, headache for him.
After your headlines.
Tom, Emily, thank you. The top stories this hour. Labour's deputy leader says she doesn't see any reason why Diane Abbott cannot stand as an MP with the party at the general election. According to the reports in The Guardian, Angela Rayner believes Ms Abbott hasn't been treated fairly or appropriately. The veteran MP had the Labour whip restored this week after a long suspension. She's accused Sir Keir Starmer of culling the party's left wing. But Sir Keir Starmer says he wants the highest quality candidates and described her as a trailblazer. The Plaid Cymru Party is pledging to undo the effects of Brexit in Wales by rejoining the single market and customs union. At a campaign launch in Bangor today, the party's leader, Thrin Apiorwerth, said the Tories had left a trail of destruction, though he cautioned Labour against taking Welsh voters for granted. Meanwhile, the leader of the Liberal Democrat Party has pledged to improve mental health among young people and children across the country. Sir Ed Davey is campaigning in Frome today. He says his party would treble taxes for social media firms to fund a mental health professional in every primary and secondary school. A 9-year-old girl remains in a critical condition this afternoon after a shooting on a busy high street in East London last night. The child was with her family inside a restaurant on Kingsland High Road in Hackney when shots were fired from a motorbike outside, injuring the girl and 3 others. One of them faces potentially life-changing injuries. And hundreds of Border Force officers at Heathrow Airport will launch a 3-day strike from tomorrow in a dispute over working hours. The Public and Commercial Services Union says more than 500 of its members working on passport control will walk out in a protest against new rosters. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there and welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. A lot of cloud today with some heavy showers around, but also some brighter spells, particularly towards the north and northwest. Higher pressure is building in, but it's taking its time. Low pressure still with us. That's carrying a couple of weather fronts into eastern parts of the UK. So some longer spells of rain there from Teesside down towards Norfolk. A lot of cloud as well and a cool breeze from the North Sea. Otherwise, it's a mix of bright spells and showers. The heaviest downpours with some thunder and hail likely from the Midlands down towards the southeast. Where we do get some brighter spells, though, it's going to feel a bit more pleasant and a drier day for the north and northwest compared with Wednesday. However, the focus for the heavy downpours will be across the south and southeast, particularly through central southern England into southeast and East Anglia, and also through the Midlands. But for Wales, for northern England, for Scotland and Northern Ireland, well, there will be some sunny spells in between the showers. And although a cool breeze is blowing from the north-northwest, it's going to feel pleasant where we do get some of those sunny spells coming through. Now into the evening, we're going to see increasingly those showers disappear. Clear spells breaking out widely, particularly towards the west, although there will be some cloud remaining in the east and some outbreaks of rain running down the North Sea coast. Where we got the cloud, temperatures staying in the double figures. Where we've got the clear spells, especially for Western Scotland and Northern Ireland, temperatures dipping into the mid-single figures. So we start off Friday with a lot of cloud in the east and central part of England, some outbreaks of rain turning to showers by the afternoon. Again, some heavy downpours for East Anglia and the southeast, but a much drier day elsewhere and plenty of sunshine for Scotland, Northern Ireland, West Wales and the southwest, where we've got the sunshine feeling very pleasant indeed with temperatures into the high teens or low 20s.
The latest GB News travel.
Hello to you, I'm Jules Buckley. Let's go to Haddington in East Lothian firstly, the A199. Just from the Abbotsview Junction, the A1 to the Barney Mains turn-off is closed due to flooding. Buckinghamshire, Aylesbury, westbound A41 is closed from Sir Henry Lee Crescent through towards the HS2 Gate 5 turn-off in the roadworks. An obstruction there. The Kingston High Street in Dalston in London. Now that's currently closed off between the Dalston Junction and Shacklewell Lane and queuing. There's a police incident. Staying in London, the rather high tunnels closed in both directions, big queues either side as emergency repairs are ongoing. And on Eurostar, reports of delays of up to an hour at St Pancras International. It looks like it's taking longer to get through border control in Paris for trains leaving the UK. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
.36, good afternoon Britain, and it is nearly time for Martin Daubney. He's up next. He joins us now to tell us what he's got on his plate. What have you got for us?
I've got a smorgasbord of tasty treats as ever on the show, 3 till 6 p.m. Starting off Civil War at the Labour Party. Once again, the left bites them on the backside. This time, Angela Rayner sensationally defying Sir Keir Starmer and calling for Diane Abbott to stand. Will this ever go away? We're not even talking about the Labour Party's policies, are we? We'll also cross to Rishi Sunak, one of the Prime Minister, about 3:25 for a live press conference on the latest on his campaign trail. Plus the Reform Party's employer immigration tax. Why I think it might be a bit of a damp squib. Some immigrants pay a huge amount of tax and we should welcome them to the country. And 40 years ago this week, Loaded magazine, a magazine I edited for 8 years, was launched. It was long forgotten. Now it's back from the dead. I'll be joined by the new editor, a woman who's going to tell me why she thinks men need a safe space to be politically incorrect. So that's all coming on the show, 3 till 6.
Goodness me.
A female editor of a lad's mag. Whatever next?
Yeah, I wonder if it's going to be a bit more toned down than, you know, in the 90s and the early noughties.
Or maybe she'll be overcompensating and it'll be toned up. I guess we'll have to find out. But Martin, thank you very much for that tease. Looking forward to that show and all those interviews too from 3 o'clock.
I don't know what I make of that, you know, Loaded magazine back.
I mean, it might... Actually, here's a serious point about it. Lots of young men are going to find salacious material online that hasn't been edited, that doesn't have any sort of publishing guidelines, that isn't controlled by the sort of magazines of the past, and they're finding all sorts of stuff that perhaps is much, much worse.
Is this making you at home squeamish as well?
So,
is this making me...
So is the re-advent of lads' mags actually something that is a very, very positive thing for young men to find stuff that is legitimate, to find stuff that is curated, to find stuff that is edited? Is that a big positive step?
Yeah, well, maybe if you ban everything else. But anyway, let us know your thoughts. Do you welcome the news that Loaded magazine is back, this time with a female editor? Perhaps it will be, you know, classy.
Why does everything have to be classy?
Well, you know... This is my world, you're just living in it. Anyway, the campaign trail continues.
Yes, Liberal Democrat leader Sir Ed Davey has made a splash on the waterslide in Somerset.
Well, hey, there he is. Nice feat. Lib Dem leader says his plans to increase the digital services tax to fund mental health care in schools shows his party stands for NHS recovery.
To make sure the NHS recovers, whether it's getting more GPs, more dentists, earlier treatment at hospital, and our package today focuses on the mental health of children. So NHS and care is right at the top of our list. We also want to get the economy back on track. The cost of living crisis is hurting many people. That's got to be tackled. And we've got a strong environmental message, particularly on the sewage scandal, where Conservatives have allowed our rivers and lakes and beaches to be hit by sewage, and they've allowed the water companies to do that.
See, there's Ed Davey talking about serious politics, but all I can think of is him going down a waterslide.
He wants that, doesn't it? There's a contrast. There's a contrast, isn't there? A GB News political correspondent, Olivia Utley, joins us now from the battle bus. Olivia, you appear to be driving the bus.
I'm sitting upstairs at the front of the bus because we're on rather bumpy roads and I'm feeling a little bit sick. But let's hope I can get through this hit with you. Yes, Ed Davey has been out on the slip and slide today. Perhaps, understandably, he's faced some questions about whether his series of completely ridiculous stunts a bit undermine the serious policy announcements that he's been making. His answer to that is, although he believes that politicians should take the voters very, very seriously, he doesn't think that politicians should take themselves seriously. Another question that Ed Davey has been asked by me, as well as a few others over the last few days, is about the costing of his policies. Yes, he's planning to raise digital taxes in order to, that's the taxes on sort of Facebook, Twitter, the big social media companies, to pay for this mental health practitioner in every primary and secondary school. There are quite a lot of other very very expensive pledges that he's made over the last few days, and he plans not to raise income tax, VAT or national insurance. So how exactly he's going to pay for that isn't quite clear. He says it'll all become clear when the costed manifesto comes out very soon. Another big question that Ed Davey is being asked over the last few days, which will continue throughout the election campaign, is what's going on with his relationship with Keir Starmer. At the moment, Ed Davey has been steering clear of criticising the Labour leader at all. Basically, reading between the lines, it seems as though the Lib Dems are hoping for the polls to narrow to the extent where we're talking about a hung parliament, and then you could be in a situation where Ed Davey and the Lib Dems become kingmakers. He does not want to close off the option of a Lib-Lab coalition. That said, he's got to toe a pretty thin line here, because he also has to persuade voters that the real alternative to the Conservatives, at least in particular areas around the country, is the Liberal Democrats rather than Labour. So he has to sort of not go too far in criticising Keir Starmer, but also show why he and the Liberal Democrats offer something very different to the Labour Party. Now, that's something which he hasn't quite managed to get to grips with over the last few days. But there's a lot of campaign to go, and I expect a lot more stunts too.
Yes, well, any rumour of what's to come tomorrow, or are you not allowed to tell us?
We are kept in the dark at every point. We get told the itinerary for the next day at sort of 7 p.m. the night before. We just see the press officers sort of grinning to themselves about whatever latest ludicrous activity they have planned. But we don't know. At one point, Ed Davey was suggesting he didn't even know either what was planned for tomorrow. So we'll just have to wait and see with bated breath.
So it's a surprise for him as well.
I'm looking forward to surfing, bungee jumping, zorbing for Ed Davey. This isn't an election campaign at all. It's just one big holiday.
Well, exactly, where other people had to cancel their holidays for this election. Ed Davey just seems to have brought us with him on his own personal holiday around the country. He does seem to be having a whale of a time. And if the aim was to get the Liberal Democrats in the headlines, then I think we can say they very much succeeded.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Olivia. And make sure you take those travel sickness tablets. Olivia Utley there, GB News political correspondent, on the campaign trail in Somerset. Do you know what? That was one of my first thoughts, Tom, when I saw all of our reporters out on the battle buses.
Yes.
I couldn't do it. If I read anything in a car, instant travel sickness.
Well, especially Christopher Hope, who has all these notes in front of him, all the papers, and he's sitting there. He's got a big sort of table to himself, of course, and our camera team as well. But my goodness, having to read all of those briefing notes, keep across all of that stuff as you're trundling down motorways, or perhaps even worse, small country roads and twisty, turny lanes.
I'd be right at the front of the bus with my head out the window. But there you go. That's why I'm here.
Our political team do for you at home. But let's go from now southwest England to southwest Iceland, where a volcano is erupting. We showed you some of these pictures yesterday. These are live pictures of this volcano. The 5th outbreak since December. A huge amount of volcanic activity in Iceland right now. And of course, it's not just majestic images that we're looking at. This has real implications around the world. Large volcanic eruptions have huge impact on the climate and, of course, sometimes even on air travel too. But here we are in the southwest of Iceland.
Amazing, isn't it?
With this enormous volcano.
I'm just reading that these lava flows are threatening to cut off the town. I believe there have been evacuations, but it's very stunning to view it from the safety of the studio. Look at that, beautiful, the lava spilling out.
Now, Emily, here's a challenge. Can we pronounce any of the towns that might be cut off by this volcano?
Grindavik.
Very good.
There we go.
Wow,
I have an Icelandic
braver than I am. Braver than I am.
Right, we'll be back very shortly indeed. We'll be heading to Cameron Walker to find out more about what's going on re the royal family. Stay with us.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
This is about the Biden administration kind of resisting calls from Harry's lawyers whether or not this ongoing thing about releasing his visa records over the alleged, in Spare, he admitted to taking, remember his memoir Spare? He admitted to taking cocaine, marijuana and magic mushrooms. And a lot of people are saying, was he honest and truthful in his application, in his visa application? You have to say, have you taken drugs? He said no, and then in Spare he said yes. So I think this is absolutely fascinating. They're saying they can't release these records because there is a stigma attached to law enforcement records. Yes, there's a stigma attached to that, but then don't say... everybody else, if you write yes on a visa application, you will be chucked out of the United States. You will be denied entry. So I think this is fascinating that on this issue of whether there is a stigma for Harry or not, he can have his law enforcement records not released into the public domain.
The bottom line is, do we want him back?
So what's interesting is it seems to be becoming a political dividing line in the States because Biden is the administration trying to do Harry a favour by keeping them under wraps, but Trump has promised that he will, the file will be made public if he wins again.
Trump's been very strong on this. He said, if Harry lied, then he's out.
The one thing about America is their politicians make ours look sane. Which is saying something.
I'm slightly confused about this whole story because, OK, sure, Prince Harry has said this. How many pop stars, rock stars, movie stars, like every
the difference is, well, I don't think it's just a British. I think millions of Brits, to be fair to them, lie on the form every year. Millions of people from around the world lie on the form every year. Not, of course.
I'm not going to name any pop star specifically, but I would be mightily surprised if any hadn't indulged in what...
Yes, but of course they haven't given written evidence in their biography that they have, and that's the difference.
Britain's election channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Tom Harwood. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Emily Carver. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Just coming up to 10 to 3. Now, the King will take part in the Trooping of the Colour ceremony on the 15th of June.
Yes, but it's also been confirmed that the Princess of Wales, Catherine, will miss the Colonel's review ahead of the event as she continues her cancer recovery.
Well, this comes as nearly 1,000 soldiers and around 240 horses. Around 240, not specifically 240.
240 and a half. And a donkey.
What's half a horse? Oh, yeah, no, OK, very good. But they're all from the Household Division. They performed a khaki rehearsal of the King's birthday parade today.
That's basically a dress rehearsal, isn't it?
Yeah.
Joining us now is GB News royal correspondent Cameron Walker. Cameron, disappointing that the Princess of Wales won't make it to this Colonel review on June the 8th, but the King will be at the Trooping of the Colour.
Yes, Emily, some good news and some bad news. I spent most of the morning here at Horse Guards Parade watching that khaki rehearsal. We'll have more on that later. But as that rehearsal was taking place, Buckingham Palace and Kensington Palace confirmed, as I said, good news and bad news. The first of which is the King is going to be taking part in Trooping the Colour on the 15th of June. But there are going to be, it is going to be adapted because of his ongoing cancer treatment. So instead of riding on horseback from Buckingham Palace down the Mall to here at Horse Guards Parade, he will be riding in a carriage with the Queen as well, and that is where he will also inspect the troops from that carriage. Now, the week before that is the Colonel's review. Now, the Irish Guards are trooping their colour on Horse Guards Parade on the 15th of June. Their Colonel is the Princess of Wales, but Kensington Palace unfortunately has confirmed this afternoon that the Princess will not be taking part in that review. We know she is still going on undergoing cancer treatment. She wishes to be left left to recover in private, and that seems to be exactly what is happening. As to whether she's going to turn up to Trooping the Colour itself, a big question mark remains over that. The only person who has been confirmed, who's actually, in terms of the royal family members, who's going to the King's birthday parade, is the King. We are expecting more details from Buckingham Palace at a later date as to which other royals will be in attendance. But I did speak to Lieutenant Colonel James Shaw and Lieutenant Colonel James Colby, and they gave their reaction to both the King and the Princess of Wales's news.
We wish the Colonel of the Irish Guards the best of best wishes for her recovery, and again the Irish Guards are hugely proud to have her as their Colonel and want to put on a really special show this year.
It is. It's wonderful, and it's wonderful for the Army on behalf of the country to be able to put on a show that is the birthday parade. It's the nearest thing we have to a national day anyway, and for him to now come out of his recovery, it's wonderful for us to be able to put a parade on for him to hopefully cheer him up a bit more.
Trooping the Colour is the most potent display of soft power that the Army can deliver, and this, of course, has been the celebration of the King, the official sovereign's birthday of over 260 years. A khaki rehearsal, though, so none of those famous red tunics. They were all in their greens. I think perhaps we should put this as a bit of a tech rehearsal rather than a dress rehearsal, but it was the first time they performed their parade in front of a crowd of 1,000 people. That is to get the horses used to the loud noises which takes place during Trooping the Colour. All 7 regiments of the Household Division took part, but as I said, it's the Irish Guards who are trooping their colour in front of the King this year. And of course the royal family, as I said, will be in attendance. And Tom and Emily, of course, the question remains, what the King and the Princess of Wales's health. Of course, the King, it appears, is positive that he's going to be taking part in Trooping the Colour, but of course adaptations will be made.
Thank you very much indeed, Cameron Walker, for bringing us the very latest. GB News royal correspondent. Great to speak to you.
Absolutely. I heard that there was some clanking there. I'm not quite sure what's going on.
Yes, I wasn't sure.
Well, no, I think because
sounded like me in the kitchen.
Well, there are big sort of seating racks all around Horse Guards Parade for all of the visiting dignitaries and people to watch what is going on. So perhaps they're setting some up or doing some final preparations there.
It's been quite the show, hasn't it, today?
I feel like we've been all around the country and other countries as well. We've even seen Iceland. But no, this is a really important time, of course, because the general election campaign is now in full swing. Parliament has been dissolved as of 1 minute past midnight this morning. There are no members of Parliament. Everything is to play for, and a new one will be elected in 5 weeks' time.
And have you noticed the difference? That there's no MPs.
No MPs, isn't
no
the country
MPs
a wonderful place?
If you're an anarchist, of course. But we'll be back tomorrow at 12 o'clock, as usual. Are you on this evening?
I am, 8 p.m. I'm covering, standing in for Jacob, of course, throughout the general election campaign, while he's busy defending what is becoming a more marginal seat, thanks to boundary changes down in Somerset.
And Martin's coming up, and he's going to be speaking to both Richard Tice and the new female editor of Lads Mag Loaded. You won't want to miss it.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest forecast from the Met Office for GB News. A lot of cloud today with some heavy showers around, but also some brighter spells, particularly towards the north and northwest. Higher pressure is building in, but it's taking its time. Low pressure still with us. That's carrying a couple of weather fronts into eastern parts of the UK. So some longer spells of rain there from Teesside down towards Norfolk. A lot of cloud as well, and a cool breeze from the North Sea. Otherwise, it's a mix of bright spells and showers. The heaviest downpours with some thunder and hail likely from the Midlands down towards the southeast. Where we do get some brighter spells, though, it's going to feel a bit more pleasant and a drier day for the north and northwest compared with Wednesday. However, the focus for the heavy downpours will be across the south and southeast, particularly through central southern England into southeast and East Anglia, and also through the Midlands. But for Wales, for northern England, for Scotland and Northern Ireland, well, there will be some sunny spells in between the showers. And although a cool breeze is blowing from the north-northwest, it's going to feel pleasant where we do get some of those sunny spells coming through. Now into the evening, we're going to see increasingly those showers disappear. Clear spells breaking out widely, particularly towards the west, although there will be some cloud remaining in the east and some outbreaks of rain running down the North Sea coast. Where we got the cloud, temperatures staying in the double figures. Where we've got the clear spells, especially for Western Scotland, Northern Ireland, temperatures dipping into the mid-single figures. So we start off Friday with a lot of cloud in the east and central part of England, some outbreaks of rain turning to showers by the afternoon, again some heavy downpours for East Anglia and the southeast, but a much drier day elsewhere and plenty of sunshine for Scotland, Northern Ireland, West Wales and the southwest, where we've got the sunshine feeling very pleasant indeed with temperatures into the high teens or low 20s.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the final week to see how you can win a whopping £20,000 cash. And because it's totally tax-free, every single penny will be in your bank account to do whatever you like with. £20,000 in tax-free cash really could be yours this summer. Hurry, as lines close on Friday. You've got to be in it to win it. For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 632